Why on earth did you arrive in a rideshare? Grandma Beatrice's voice cut through the soft jazz playing in the private dining room of the Oakmont Country Club. She set down her crystal wine glass and narrowed her sharp eyes at me. Where is the Porsche I bought you for your 35th birthday last week? The entire table went dead silent. Before I could even process the question, my mother Susan reached over, patted my hand with a sickeningly sweet smile, and answered for me. Oh, Beatrice, we gave it to her brother. He just needed it more than she did. I sat there completely frozen. I am Olivia, 35 years old and a senior corporate fraud investigator. I spend my days unearthing multi-million-dollar financial crimes, analyzing complex bank records, and putting white-collar criminals behind bars. Yet I was sitting there completely blindsided by the blatant theft happening right under my nose by my own family. If you are watching this, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your boundaries trampled by toxic family members who expect you to just smile and take the abuse. You will want to hear exactly how I turned this dinner into the worst night of their lives. Grandma Beatrice was celebrating her 82nd birthday. She had spared no expense booking the most exclusive private room at the club. The mahogany walls, the heavy silver cutlery, the dim, elegant lighting, all of it was supposed to set the stage for a night of joyful celebration. Instead, the air was suddenly thick with suffocating tension. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at my mother, whose perfectly manicured hand was still resting on mine. Her grip, however, was like a vice digging her acrylic nails into my skin in a silent, violent warning to keep my mouth shut. My father, Richard, a vice president at a regional commercial bank, cleared his throat loudly. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and offered Grandma Beatrice a stiff, artificial smile that did not reach his eyes. Now, Mother, my father said, using his deep, authoritative banking voice, the exact tone he always used to intimidate bank tellers and family members into submission. Let us not make a fuss over a simple family arrangement. Olivia generously offered the vehicle to Bradley. You know, he and Jasmine are trying to get his new business off the ground. A luxury SUV presents the right image for high net worth investors. Olivia works from home half the time anyway. She does not need a $90,000 car sitting in the driveway collecting dust. Generously offered. The words echoed in my head, making my blood boil. I had not offered anything. I had been out of town on a high-stakes business trip in Chicago for the past 5 days. I had left the keys to the Porsche in the decorative bowl in my hallway, a habit I had formed living alone in a secure gated community. My parents had a spare key to my house for emergencies. They had used that emergency key to walk right into my home, steal my birthday present, and hand it over to my 32-year-old brother. I pulled my hand away from my mother's claws and pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. Several heads turned from the main dining area just beyond our private archway. Generously offered, I repeated, my voice shaking with a dangerous mixture of rage and sheer disbelief. I was in Chicago, Dad. I came home 2 hours ago to an empty driveway and genuinely thought my car had been stolen by criminals. I guess I was right. Sit down, Olivia. My mother hissed, her pleasant facade dropping instantly. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. Stop making a scene and embarrassing us in front of your grandmother. You have plenty of money. You're being entirely selfish right now, just like you always are. My father reached over and grabbed my forearm, his thick fingers pressing hard into my skin, attempting to physically force me back into my seat. You are going to sit down, smile, and eat your dinner, he ordered through gritted teeth. We handled this internally as a family. Do not ruin your grandmother's birthday with your petty jealousy. My mother had a master's degree in emotional manipulation. If there was a gold medal for gaslighting, Susan would be standing on the Olympic podium. Growing up, every achievement of mine was minimized to protect Bradley's fragile ego. When I graduated at the top of my university class, my parents skipped the ceremony because Bradley had a minor cold and needed his mother. When I bought my first home entirely on my own, they complained the guest room was not big enough for their liking. But this was an entirely new level of depravity. They were gaslighting me in real time, attempting to rewrite reality while the ink was still wet. Grandma Beatrice did not miss a beat. She might have been 82, but her mind was as sharp as a scalpel. She looked from my father's gripping hand to my mother's panicked, angry face. Handled it internally, Grandma Beatrice repeated her tone, dropping 10 degrees, freezing the air around us. I purchased that vehicle with my own money, Richard. The title is in Olivia's name. You do not have the legal authority to reassign my gifts. It is just a car, Beatrice, my mother pleaded, trying to adopt a victimized, whining tone. Bradley has been struggling. You know how hard things have been for him since his last venture went under. We just wanted to give him a leg up. Olivia does not even care about luxury cars. I opened my mouth to tell them exactly what I cared about, to demand they return the vehicle immediately, or I would call the police right there from the dinner table. But before the words could leave my lips, a flash of sleek metallic gray caught my eye through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the club's grand entrance. The Oakmont Valet area was bathed in bright, warm light. Pulling directly into the VIP circle was a brand-new, fully loaded Porsche Cayenne. My Porsche Cayenne. The custom metallic gray paint gleamed brilliantly under the portico lights. The valet attendant rushed forward, opening the driver's side door. Out stepped my younger brother Bradley, wearing a tailored suit that I knew for an absolute fact he could not afford. He tossed my keys carelessly to the valet, flashing his signature arrogant grin as if he owned the entire building. From the passenger side emerged his wife Jasmine. She was a beautiful African-American woman, stunningly dressed in a designer silk gown, adjusting her expensive diamond jewelry as she stepped onto the pavement. She hooked her arm through Bradley's, laughing loudly at something he said, both of them radiating an aura of absolute entitlement. They had driven my stolen car to the very dinner party hosted by the woman who bought it for me. The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily breathless. I stood there, ignoring my father's tightening grip on my arm, and pointed a trembling finger toward the window. "You gave it to him," I said, my voice eerily calm, now that the initial shock was morphing into cold, calculated fury. "And he drove it here. To Grandma's birthday." My father let go of my arm, following my gaze out the window. For a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine panic crossed his face. He clearly had not expected Bradley to be foolish enough to bring the stolen vehicle to the club, but the panic was quickly replaced by a hardened, defensive glare. "He wanted to show his grandmother how well the car suits him," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling slightly, desperate to spin the narrative before Bradley walked through the door. "He is so proud of it, Olivia. Just look at him. He finally looks like the successful entrepreneur he was always meant to be. You could not possibly want to strip that confidence away from your own brother." "Watch me," I whispered. Grandma Beatrice sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly over her silver-handled cane. She did not yell, she did not gasp. She simply watched the two of them stroll through the heavy oak doors of the country club lobby. "Well," Grandma Beatrice said, her voice dripping with an icy anticipation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, "this is going to be a very memorable birthday dinner." As the heavy mahogany doors of our private room swung open, the golden child had finally arrived, completely unaware that he had just driven a $90,000 nail into his own coffin. Bradley strode into the private dining room like he owned the country club. His posture oozed the kind of unearned confidence only a perpetually bailed-out son could possess. Jasmine trailed just behind him, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She was already scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious or entirely indifferent to the suffocating tension in the room. Bradley did not even look at me first. He walked straight to the head of the table, where Grandma Beatrice sat, leaned over, and kissed her cheek. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he said smoothly. "Sorry we are a little late." Traffic coming off the interstate was brutal, but the new ride handles like an absolute dream. He straightened up, finally turning his attention to me. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulled out the sleek leather keychain holding the spare key to my Porsche, and tossed it casually onto the white tablecloth right next to my water glass. The heavy metal clattered loudly against the wood underneath. "Thanks again for this, Liv," he said, flashing that trademark grin that had gotten him out of every scraped knee and failed report card since the second grade. "But we need to talk about the insurance premiums. I called my broker on the drive over here, and insuring a $90,000 vehicle under my business name is astronomical right now. Since the title is still in your name for the time being, it makes way more sense for you to just keep paying the premium. Consider it an investment in your little brother's future." I stared at the key resting on the tablecloth. He was not just stealing my car, he expected me to finance his theft. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was staggering. I looked up at him, my expression completely blank. "You want me to pay the insurance on the car you just stole from my driveway?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. Jasmine finally looked up from her screen, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh. "Steal is such a dramatic word, Olivia," she said, rolling her eyes, as she took her seat next to my brother. "Your parents explained everything to us. It is a family reallocation of assets. You are single, you sit at a computer all day. Bradley is an entrepreneur. He has client meetings. He needs to project success to secure funding." Grandma Beatrice struck the floor with her cane. The sharp thud echoed through the dining room, instantly silencing Jasmine. "Reallocation of assets." Grandma Beatrice repeated, the icy edge in her voice sharpening into a blade. "That is a fascinating term for grand theft auto. Bradley, you will hand those keys to your sister this instant. And then you will walk out to the valet, retrieve your own vehicle, and rethink your entire approach to this family." Bradley actually laughed. It was a short, breathy chuckle of genuine disbelief. He pulled out a chair next to my father and sat down completely unfazed by the matriarch's fury. He took a sip of water, looking completely relaxed. The fact that he felt entirely safe committing a felony simply because our parents sanctioned it told me everything I needed to know about his worldview. He genuinely believed that because he was the son, the golden boy, everything I worked for was just an extension of his own inheritance. "Come on, Grandma," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Do not let Liv spin you up. She is just being dramatic because she likes playing the victim. Look at her. Liv, you work from home. You literally audit spreadsheets in your sweatpants 4 days a week. What does a single woman with no kids need a luxury family SUV for? You take a rideshare to the grocery store half the time because you hate parallel parking downtown. It is a waste of a beautiful machine to let it sit in your garage." Before I could tear his argument apart, my mother jumped right in, desperate to keep the narrative alive and protect her favorite child from the incoming fallout. "Exactly," Susan chimed in, nodding vigorously while shooting me a warning glare. Olivia generously offered it to him, Beatrice. She realized she had been acting quite selfishly lately, and this was her way of making amends. It was a beautiful gesture until she decided to throw a tantrum for attention. I turned my head slowly to look at my mother. The sheer audacity of her words felt like a physical slap across the face. Selfishly, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "How exactly have I been selfish, Mom?" Susan straightened her posture, looking around the table as if gathering support from an invisible audience. "Well, for starters," she began, her tone dripping with rehearsed disappointment, "you refused to contribute to Bradley and Jasmine's fertility treatments last year. Your brother is trying to give us grandchildren, trying to expand this family, and you would not even dip into your massive savings to help them." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The fertility treatments she mentioned were a complete fabrication. They had asked me for $40,000 in cash last year, claiming it was for medical procedures. I had run a quiet background check on Bradley's failing business and knew for a fact he was underwater on a massive commercial loan. They wanted my money to bail him out, using the emotional manipulation of a non-existent baby to get it. When I asked for an invoice from the fertility clinic to pay them directly, Bradley threw a fit and stopped talking to me for 3 months. And then there was Thanksgiving. My mother continued, emboldened by my silence. You chose to go to Paris with your friends instead of hosting us at your house, even though you have the largest dining room. You constantly prioritize your own independence and your career over the basic needs of this family. Giving Bradley the car was the absolute least you could do to show you still care about us. You owe him this support. I looked at my father, who was watching me with a stern, unwavering glare. He was silently daring me to fight back, confident that his position as the patriarch would crush any rebellion I attempted to mount. He nodded along with my mother's speech, crossing his arms over his chest. "Your mother is right, Olivia," my father said heavily. "You have been pulling away from us for years, building your little corporate empire while ignoring your blood. Bradley needed a win. He needed something to show his investors that he is on the rise. You have more money than you know what to do with. Stop being greedy." I sat back in my chair, absorbing the reality of my family. They had broken into my home, stolen a $90,000 vehicle gifted to me by my grandmother, driven it to her birthday dinner, demanded I pay the insurance on it, and were now publicly crucifying me as a greedy, selfish villain for not thanking them for the privilege of being robbed. Jasmine leaned forward, placing her elbows on the white tablecloth and clasping her hands together. "And honestly, Olivia, it is incredibly toxic of you to try and ruin your grandmother's birthday dinner by backing out of your promise now. We already scheduled an appointment to have the interior detailed tomorrow morning. The standard beige leather is just a little too basic for the brand image we are going for. We are having it swapped for custom black leather with red stitching. You should be happy we are upgrading it for you." I stared at her perfectly glossed lips. They were criticizing the interior color of the luxury vehicle they were currently stealing. The absurdity was so profound it bypassed anger and landed squarely in the realm of cold, calculated war. They thought I was just the quiet, compliant daughter who would swallow her pride to keep the peace. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The audacity hung in the air, thick and suffocating, but before I could even formulate a response to Jasmine complaining about the interior color of my stolen vehicle, the heavy mahogany doors swung open again. Two waitstaff members entered carrying silver pitchers of ice water and a basket of warm artisan bread. Their arrival should have been a signal to pause the family drama, to adopt the polite masks people wear in upscale establishments. But Jasmine operated on a completely different frequency. For her, the arrival of the waitstaff was not an interruption. It was the introduction of an audience. Jasmine instantly straightened her posture, shifting her expression from condescending annoyance to profound, tragic burden. She purposely raised her volume, ensuring her voice would carry past our table and reach the ears of the young waiter carefully pouring water into my father's crystal glass. "You know, Olivia, it is actually deeply concerning how you view resources." Jasmine began, her tone dripping with rehearsed sorrow. She placed a hand over her heart, playing the role of the exhausted peacemaker. "You are sitting on all this wealth, hoarding it in your private gated community, while your brother is out here trying to build actual generational wealth for our future children. It is honestly heartbreaking to watch you succumb to this kind of toxic individualism." I stared at her, genuinely mesmerized by her ability to weaponize therapy speak to justify Grand Theft Auto. Jasmine was wearing a designer silk gown and a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew for a fact Bradley had put on a high-interest credit card that was rapidly approaching its limit. Yet she sat there in a private dining room of a country club, lecturing me about hoarding resources because I wanted to keep the birthday present my grandmother had legally purchased for me. "We are trying to build a legacy," Olivia Jasmine continued, gesturing dramatically toward Bradley, who was currently buttering a piece of sourdough bread with an infuriatingly smug expression. "Bradley is out there hustling every single day, trying to secure funding, trying to create a business that will provide for our family for decades. And what are you doing? You are just accumulating things you do not even use. You are a single woman living in a 3-bedroom house. You have a massive savings account. And now you want to hoard a luxury vehicle just so it can sit in your garage while you work from your kitchen island. It is borderline pathological how much you refuse to share." The young waiter froze mid-pour, his eyes darting nervously between Jasmine and me. He quickly finished filling the glass, bowed his head and practically sprinted out of the room, letting the heavy doors shut firmly behind him. The moment the latch clicked, the illusion of public decorum vanished completely. Jasmine reached down beside her chair and hoisted her pristine designer handbag onto her lap. She snapped it open and pulled out a sleek leather planner, tapping her manicured fingernails against its cover. Anyway, Jasmine sighed, dropping the victim act and returning to her standard demanding tone. Bradley only found one key fob in that little decorative bowl in your entryway. We obviously need the second fob, but more importantly, we need the physical registration and the title paperwork tonight. We have to finalize the commercial insurance policy under Bradley's corporate account first thing tomorrow morning. So if you could just hand those over right now, we can stop talking about this and actually enjoy your grandmother's beautiful birthday dinner. I did not blink. I did not move my hands from my lap. You want the registration? I repeated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Yes, Olivia. Try to keep up, Jasmine snapped, rolling her eyes as she flipped open her planner to check a schedule that I knew was completely empty. I have an appointment at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning at the premium detailing shop downtown. They cannot start ripping out those basic beige seats without proof of ownership. I told you we are putting in custom black leather with red piping. The shop owner was very clear that he needs to see the registration before he begins any structural modifications to a vehicle of that value. It is going to look so much more elevated once they finish. You should actually thank us for taking the initiative to improve the resale value of the asset. My mother leaned forward, placing her elbows on the table, nodding along as if Jasmine had just delivered a brilliant corporate presentation. Jasmine is being incredibly proactive. Olivia, my mother said, her voice softening into that patronizing maternal tone she used whenever she was trying to force me to surrender. They are taking excellent care of the vehicle. You know Bradley has always been meticulous about cars. Just reach into your purse and give them the documents. You can easily order a replacement copy for your own records if you really feel the need to keep one for sentimental reasons. Sentimental reasons. She was referring to the legal title of a $90,000 asset as a sentimental keepsake. The psychological distortion required to maintain their reality was truly staggering. My father, sensing that I was not immediately complying, decided it was time to apply his brand of heavy-handed pressure. Listen to your mother, Olivia. My father barked, his face flushing a deep shade of red. We are not going to sit here and negotiate over a piece of paper. Your brother has investor meetings lined up this week. He needs to project stability and success. Jasmine has taken the time to arrange the custom interior work to ensure the vehicle matches their corporate branding. Do not ruin this for them with your stubbornness. Jasmine offered my father a sweet, appreciative smile before turning her predatory gaze back to me. It is about equity, Olivia, she said, leaning across the table, her eyes locking onto mine. You have had everything handed to you. You got the good grades, the quiet life, the easy corporate job. You had all the advantages, and now you are punishing Bradley simply because he took a different, harder path as an entrepreneur. Handing over the registration tonight is the first step in your healing process. It is time to let go of this bitter jealousy you have toward your brother. The word equity echoed in my mind. My parents had secretly drained my college fund to buy Bradley his first house, a house he lost to foreclosure 3 years later. I had spent a decade paying off $80,000 in student loans while working 80-hour weeks fighting tooth and nail for every promotion in a cutthroat corporate environment. Bradley had failed out of 3 different colleges, bankrupted 2 businesses, and was currently drowning in debt. Yet in their twisted narrative, I was the privileged oppressor, and they were the noble victims fighting for their rightful share of my hard-earned life. I glanced over at Grandma Beatrice. She had not touched her water. She had not spoken a word since Bradley and Jasmine walked in. She was simply watching the performance, her face a mask of cold, calculating silence. She caught my eye, and for a fraction of a second, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the absolute certainty of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel trap. Jasmine sighed loudly, clearly agitated by my silence. She extended her arm across the wide table, turning her hand over and opening her palm, waiting for me to place the documents into it, like an obedient, defeated servant. "Come on, Olivia," Jasmine demanded, snapping her fingers once impatiently. "The second fob and the registration. Hand them over. Let us be adults about this and move on." I looked at Jasmine's outstretched hand, her diamond bracelet catching the warm light of the chandelier. I felt the satisfying heavy weight of the reality they were completely ignorant of. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought public pressure and family guilt would force me to quietly surrender my property to maintain the peace. They did not realize that I had stopped caring about their peace a long time ago. I slowly reached down to my side, slipping my hand into the side pocket of my leather designer purse. My fingers brushed against the thick, crisp paper of the official state vehicle registration. I felt the cool plastic of the second key fob resting at the bottom of the bag. I kept my eyes locked on Jasmine's expectant, demanding face as I gripped the documents. I slowly pulled my hand out of my leather bag. First came the heavy black key fob, its pristine silver crest catching the warm light of the chandelier overhead. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth, purposely setting it just an inch out of Jasmine's reach. Her eyes locked onto the small device like a hawk spotting prey, her manicured fingers twitching with the urge to simply snatch it away. Next, I brought out the thick, crisp envelope containing the official state vehicle registration. I did not slide it across the table. I did not offer it forward. Instead, I held it firmly in my left hand, resting my elbow comfortably on the armrest of my chair. With my right hand, I calmly picked up my crystal glass of sparkling water. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid coated my throat, steadying my pulse, while the silence in the room stretched out, pulling as tight as a piano wire. "You mean this registration?" I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly level. I tapped the thick paper with my index finger. "The one with my name legally printed on it?" I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, unyielding smile of someone who had just locked the door to the cage from the outside. The reaction was instantaneous. Jasmine gasped loudly, reeling back in her padded chair, as if I had just thrown the glass of ice water directly into her face. Bradley slammed both of his hands onto his armrests, his jaw clenching so hard I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. But it was my father who truly lost control. Bang! Richard brought his heavy fist down onto the table with enough force to make the heavy silver cutlery rattle against the porcelain plates. The wine sloshed dangerously close to the rims of the crystal glasses. The sharp, explosive sound echoed off the mahogany walls, violently cutting through the soft, ambient jazz music bleeding in from the main dining room. "Hand it over, Olivia." "Right now." My father's voice was a deep, guttural roar. He completely abandoned his polished country club executive persona. This was the raw, tyrannical anger of a man who was used to absolute obedience and was suddenly facing blatant defiance. He intentionally projected his voice, weaponizing his volume to draw the attention of the waitstaff and the patrons out in the adjacent hall. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted me to feel the crushing weight of public humiliation. He assumed that, like a good daughter, I would immediately fold and hand over the documents just to make the embarrassing spectacle stop. "You are acting like a petulant child," my father boomed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Give your sister-in-law the documents before I completely lose my patience." I did not flinch. I did not lower my eyes to the table. I simply placed my water glass back onto the coaster. "I am 35 years old, Dad," I said, matching his volume but remaining entirely devoid of his hysterical anger. "I am not a child you can bully into submission. You do not get to steal a $90,000 asset from my driveway and then yell at me for not providing the paperwork to make your crime more convenient." Jasmine pointed a shaking diamond-clad finger at me across the table. "Do you hear yourself? she shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of elegance completely shattering. "You are ruining everything. You are sitting there with a smug look on your face while you try to sabotage your own brother's future. We already booked the detailing shop. We already put down a non-refundable deposit for the custom leather. You are going to cost us money. Then you should call them right now and cancel," I replied flatly. "Because nobody is ripping the seats out of my car tomorrow. Or ever." My mother, desperate to seize control of the rapidly spiraling situation, suddenly lunged across the table. She reached for the registration still resting safely in my hand. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper, but I quickly pulled my hand back, tucking the envelope safely into my lap, completely out of her reach. "What is wrong with you, Susan?" hissed, her face contorted with a mix of profound embarrassment and furious indignation. "We are your family. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us. By making a massive scene at your grandmother's 82nd birthday dinner over a piece of metal on wheels. You are sick, Olivia. You really need professional help to deal with this pathological selfishness." "A piece of metal on wheels," I echoed, raising a single eyebrow. "If it is just a piece of metal, Mom, why did you have to use an emergency key to break into my house while I was out of town to take it? Why not just buy Bradley his own piece of metal?" "Oh, right. Because his credit is completely destroyed, and he cannot even secure a standard auto loan without Dad co-signing the paperwork." Bradley's face turned an ugly shade of crimson at the mention of his financial failures. "That is absolutely none of your business," he spat, leaning aggressively forward across his plate. "My finances are fine. My business is scaling perfectly. I just needed liquid capital, and the car helps me project the right image for my seed round investors. You are just a corporate drone. You do not understand how high-level networking operates. I understand that stealing a motor vehicle is a felony, Bradley," I countered, keeping my eyes locked dead on his. "I understand that driving a stolen vehicle to a public country club is profoundly stupid. And I understand that unless you slide those keys across the table to me right now, I am going to call the police and let them explain how the law operates." The explicit mention of the police made the thick veins in my father's neck bulge against his silk collar. He stood up from his chair, his massive frame casting a dark shadow over my side of the table. I noticed the heavy mahogany doors crack open slightly. A restaurant manager in a crisp suit peeked in, clearly alerted by my father's booming voice. But after taking one look at my father's furious stance, the manager wisely decided to step back and let the heavy doors seal shut again. We were completely isolated in our private theater of dysfunction. I glanced over at Grandma Beatrice. She remained perfectly composed, watching the chaos unfold with the calculated interest of a scientist observing rats turning on each other in a maze. She took a slow, elegant sip of her red wine, her eyes darting between my furious father and my entirely unbothered posture. She did not intervene to save my parents, and she did not intervene to stop me. She was perfectly content to let them dig their own graves. Jasmine threw her hands up in the air in an exaggerated display of absolute exasperation. "Honestly, Richard, I do not know how you deal with her," Jasmine complained to my father, completely dismissing my presence as if I were a misbehaving dog. "We are trying to elevate this family's status. We are trying to build something meaningful. And she is acting like a jealous toddler over a car she did not even buy herself. It is frankly pathetic." I turned my gaze slowly toward Jasmine. "And you are acting like a woman who is about to be formally charged as an accessory to Grand Theft Auto," I said calmly. "Let me make this incredibly simple for all of you. That vehicle belongs to me. It is registered to me. The insurance is entirely under my name. You have zero legal right to possess it, modify it, or drive it off this lot tonight." My father placed both of his heavy hands flat on the white tablecloth, leaning his weight forward until his flushed face was only inches from mine. The smell of his expensive scotch and stale anger washed over me. He had used this exact same physical intimidation tactic when I was a teenager, towering over me to force me into compliance. But I was not a terrified teenager anymore. I was a senior investigator who routinely faced down hostile defense attorneys and multi-million-dollar embezzlers. An angry man in a country club dining room was not going to make me break a sweat. "We are done playing games, Olivia," my father growled, his voice dropping into a dangerous gravelly register that promised immediate retaliation. "You think you are so smart with your corporate job and your little legal technicalities, but you are forgetting who built this family. You are forgetting who controls the purse strings." My father did not wait for me to answer his question about who controlled the purse strings. Without breaking eye contact, he reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored charcoal suit. He did not pull out a wallet. He pulled out a crisp, meticulously folded piece of paper and a heavy silver Mont Blanc pen. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he snapped the paper open and slammed it flat onto the white tablecloth directly in front of me. I looked down at the document. It was an official State Department of Motor Vehicles title transfer form. The vehicle identification number of my Porsche Cayenne was already neatly printed in blue ink at the top. The seller information was filled out with my name and address. The buyer information was filled out with Bradley's corporate entity. All that was missing was my signature on the bottom right line. The chilling realization washed over me in a wave of absolute clarity. This was not a spontaneous decision made out of desperation. This was a highly orchestrated, premeditated ambush. They had broken into my home, stolen the key, driven the car to the country club, and brought the legally binding paperwork to this exact dinner. They had calculated that the combination of public pressure, the presence of extended family, and the elegant setting of the Oakmont Country Club would trap me. They assumed I would be too embarrassed to cause a scene and would simply sign my property away to make the uncomfortable situation disappear. "Sign it," my father ordered, his voice echoing with the booming authoritarian weight he used to crush junior loan officers at his bank. He unfastened the cap of the silver pen and dropped it heavily onto the paper. "Sign the transfer of ownership right now, Olivia." I looked from the pen to my father's flushed face. "And if I decline to participate in your extortion," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. My father leaned in closer, dropping his voice into a menacing gravelly register that was designed to inspire pure terror. "If you do not sign that document right now, I am officially cutting you out of the family trust. I am the sole executor, Olivia. I have full discretionary power over the distribution of those assets. You will be entirely disinherited. You will get absolutely nothing when Grandma passes away, not a single cent." The threat hung heavily over the table. The family trust he was referring to was a multi-million-dollar estate established by my late grandfather. For my entire adult life, my parents had used that trust as a psychological weapon, dangling the promise of generational wealth to force compliance. Whenever Bradley needed to be bailed out of a financial disaster, they reminded me that I would eventually receive my fair share from the trust, so I had no right to complain about their blatant favoritism in the present. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest, with a look of supreme satisfaction. She looked at me as if I were a foolish peasant who had just lost a game of chess to a grandmaster. "You really should just sign the paper," Olivia Jasmine said, her tone laced with fake sympathy. "Are you really going to throw away your entire inheritance, millions of dollars in future assets, just because you want to be stubborn over a $90,000 car? That is terrible financial literacy. Bradley and I are just trying to maximize the family portfolio. Do not let your emotional immaturity ruin your financial future." Bradley nodded in agreement, picking up his water glass and taking a casual sip. "Dad is serious," Liv Bradley warned, trying to sound like the voice of reason. "He called the estate lawyer this morning. The paperwork to remove you as a beneficiary is already drafted. All he has to do is make one phone call tomorrow and you are entirely cut off. Just sign the title. Let me take the car and you get to keep your spot in the trust. It is a win for everybody. Do not blow up your life over a piece of metal." My mother reached across the table, tapping her manicured finger near the signature line on the DMV form. "Be reasonable, Olivia," she pleaded, her voice tightening with a mixture of anxiety and commanding pressure. Your father is not making an empty threat. You know how he gets when he is challenged. Do not force his hand. We want you to be part of this family, but we will not tolerate this level of disrespect. Pick up the pen and sign it. We can forget this ever happened and order the appetizers. I stared at the three of them. They had formed a perfect, impenetrable circle of manipulation. The father threatening financial ruin, the brother feigning rational compromise, the mother offering a false olive branch of peace in exchange for total submission. For 35 years, this exact dynamic had dictated the terms of my existence in this family. I was expected to constantly shrink myself to hand over my achievements, my money, and my boundaries to ensure the golden boy never had to face a single consequence for his failures. I looked at the silver pen resting on the table. As a senior corporate fraud investigator, I spent my life analyzing the motivations behind financial crimes. I knew the desperate lengths people would go to when they were hiding something massive. Looking at my father's red, sweating face and the aggressive way he was trying to force a signature under duress, I saw right through the bluster. This was not the confident posturing of a wealthy patriarch putting his disobedient daughter in her place. This was the frantic, sloppy behavior of a man who was terrified. He needed me to sign that title tonight because the alternative was catastrophic for him. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I picked up the title transfer document, holding it by the edges, as if it were contaminated evidence. I scanned the forged details, noting how carefully Jasmine had filled out the corporate entity information for Bradley's fake business. I then looked past my parents and locked eyes with Grandma Beatrice. She was sitting at the head of the table, her posture perfectly straight, her face an unreadable mask of aristocratic stoicism. My father had just loudly threatened to weaponize the wealth her late husband had built, to extort me over a birthday present she had personally purchased for me with her own money. He had done this while she was sitting less than 3 feet away, treating her like she was already dead and buried. I slowly placed the unsigned document back onto the table and pushed it an inch toward my father. "You are threatening to cut me out of the family trust," I said loudly, ensuring every single syllable was razor-sharp and perfectly articulated. "You are threatening to disinherit me from the fortune grandfather built, all to protect your son from the consequences of stealing a vehicle." "I am not threatening you," my father snarled, pointing a thick finger at my face. "I am giving you a promise. Sign the paper or you are completely dead to this family financially. You will never see a dime." I smiled, the coldness spreading all the way to my eyes. Before my father could explode at the sight of my smile, a sound cut through the heavy tension of the private dining room. It was not a shout. It was a laugh. Grandma Beatrice was laughing. It was a dry, hollow, entirely humorless sound that echoed off the mahogany walls like brittle glass shattering on a marble floor. She leaned forward slightly, resting both of her wrinkled hands heavily on the silver handle of her cane. She looked directly at her son, completely ignoring his flushed, aggressive posture. "What trust?" Richard Grandma Beatrice asked. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded absolute authority. My father froze. The deep, tyrannical red drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His heavy hands, which had been planted so aggressively on the tablecloth just a second ago, suddenly twitched. He pulled them back, straightening his posture and instinctively tugging at the collar of his expensive silk tie. "Mother," my father stammered, his booming banking voice instantly replaced by the nervous, high-pitched tone of a schoolboy caught in a lie. "This is a private matter between me and Olivia. We can discuss estate planning at a more appropriate time. We are here to celebrate your birthday. We will discuss it right now." Grandma Beatrice commanded, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "You just stood over my granddaughter and threatened to disinherit her from a multi-million-dollar family trust. You tried to use my late husband's life work to extort a vehicle from her. I am simply asking for a logistical explanation, Richard. How exactly do you plan to cut her out of an account that currently holds exactly $0.00?" The room went completely still. Even the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second, my mind racing to process the words she had just spoken. $0. I looked at my mother. Susan was staring down at her empty porcelain plate, her face deathly pale. She reached out and grabbed my father's sleeve, her knuckles turning white. Jasmine suddenly stopped checking her phone, her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowing in genuine confusion. Bradley, however, simply picked up his water glass and took a long, slow sip, actively avoiding making eye contact with anyone at the table. "Beatrice, please," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. She tried to deploy her usual sweet, victimized tone, but it cracked under the weight of the matriarch's icy glare. Not in front of the children. It was a temporary reallocation of funds, a family investment. We always intended to put the capital back once the returns came in. "Do not use corporate jargon to describe theft," Susan Grandma Beatrice snapped, shutting my mother down instantly. "My husband spent 45 years building a diversified portfolio of real estate and municipal bonds so his family would have a safety net. He appointed you as the executor, Richard, because he trusted your financial expertise." Grandma Beatrice slowly turned her gaze back to my father. "Tell her, Richard," she ordered. "Tell Olivia exactly why you cannot disinherit her. Tell her what you did 5 years ago." My father looked like a man standing on the gallows. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He refused to look at me, keeping his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just above my head. "5 years ago," my father began, his voice barely a mumble. "Bradley had an incredible opportunity. His tech startup was on the verge of a massive breakthrough. He was developing a proprietary logistics application. It was going to revolutionize the delivery market. But he hit a cash flow problem. The venture capital firms were demanding too much equity, and the traditional banks were not seeing the vision. He needed a runway," my mother interjected defensively, finally looking up. "He just needed bridge capital to keep the developers on payroll for another 6 months before the public launch. We could not just let his dream die, Olivia. He is your brother. We had to support him." "So you liquidated the trust," I said. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest, but I kept my voice perfectly level. I did not yell. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal required cold, clinical precision. "You bypassed your fiduciary duty as the executor. You secretly sold off grandfather's real estate holdings, cashed out the mutual funds, and poured millions of dollars of generational wealth into Bradley's failing app." "It was not failing," Bradley snapped, suddenly finding his courage, now that his business acumen was being insulted. "We had a solid user acquisition strategy. The market just shifted unexpectedly. The big tech firms updated their algorithms and boxed us out. It was bad timing, Liv. That is just how the startup world works. High risk, high reward. It was an angel investment." "An angel investment," I repeated, savoring the absolute absurdity of the phrase. "You burned through millions of dollars in less than a year. The app never even launched. You declared bankruptcy 8 months later and moved back into Mom and Dad's guest house." I looked back at my father, who was still refusing to meet my eyes. "You sat there for 5 years. I said, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the table. "Every time I accomplished something, every time I got a promotion, every time I bought a piece of property, you reminded me that I was being greedy. You demanded I pay for family vacations. You demanded I hand over my college fund for Bradley's starter home. You demanded I surrender my car tonight. And whenever I pushed back, you threatened to cut me out of a trust fund that you had already secretly incinerated. You do not understand the pressure I was under," my father hissed, finally looking at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic kind of anger. "He is my son. He carries the family name. I had to give him a chance to build an empire. I was going to replenish the accounts. I had a 10-year market strategy to build the capital back up through my own bonuses. I just needed time." "You did not need time," Richard. Grandma Beatrice interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You needed a spine. You enabled a spoiled child to destroy his own life, and you funded his delusions with my money." Grandma Beatrice reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents. She tossed them onto the center of the table. They landed with a heavy thud right next to the forged DMV title transfer. "I have known for 6 months," Richard. Grandma Beatrice stated plainly. I noticed irregularities in the quarterly tax filings. I hired an independent forensic accounting firm to audit the estate. They found the shell companies you used to funnel the money out of the trust and into Bradley's corporate accounts. They found the forged signatures you used to bypass the secondary authorization protocols. My father slumped back into his chair as if all the bones in his body had suddenly evaporated. His face was a mask of sheer terror. He knew exactly what a forensic audit meant. He knew the paper trail was completely undeniable. "You were threatening Olivia with an empty gun." Grandma Beatrice continued, turning her sharp eyes toward me with a look of profound respect. "But more importantly, Richard, you severely underestimated your daughter. You assumed she would cower and cry like she did when she was a teenager. You forgot that she grew up. You forgot what she does for a living." The power dynamic in the room had completely shattered. The towering authoritative patriarch had been reduced to a trembling fraud. The sweet, victimized mother was exposed as a complicit enabler. The golden child was revealed to be a financial parasite who had single-handedly destroyed his family's legacy. I looked down at the forged title transfer document still sitting near my water glass. The threat of disinheritance was gone. The illusion of family loyalty was dead. They had nothing left to hold over me. They had played their final card, and it was a complete bluff. I picked up my water glass and took another sip. Jasmine was staring at Bradley with wide, panicked eyes, clearly doing the math in her head and realizing the bottomless wealth she thought she married into was an absolute fiction. My mother was silently crying, the tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Now then," I said calmly, setting the glass down and breaking the suffocating silence. "Since we have established that Dad is entirely broke and the family trust is a work of fiction, let us get back to the matter at hand. The keys to my Porsche." My mother's head snapped up. The silent, pathetic tears she had been shedding just moments before vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. The sheer speed of her emotional shift was terrifying to witness. She realized that playing the weeping victim was no longer going to work with Grandma Beatrice in the room holding the forensic audit, so she immediately reverted to her most natural state, vicious attack mode. "You are a heartless monster, Olivia," my mother hissed, her voice shaking with rage as she pointed a manicured finger across the table at me. "You sit there looking so smug, looking so superior to the rest of us. But this is exactly why this family is falling apart. It is your fault. If you had just supported your brother's dreams from the beginning, we would not have been forced to take such drastic measures. We would not have had to touch the family trust if you had just been a team player." I actually let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A team player?" I asked, leaning slightly forward. "You committed massive financial fraud, drained millions of dollars from an account you did not own, and you are honestly sitting there trying to blame me for not being a team player." "Yes," Susan shrieked, slamming her hand flat onto the table. "You have always hoarded your success. You watched Bradley struggle to find his footing, and you did absolutely nothing to lift him up. You had the high-paying corporate job. You had the bonuses. You could have invested in his application. You could have partnered with him. But no, you wanted to keep all your money to yourself so you could buy designer clothes and live in your gated community. You forced your father to find the capital elsewhere to save your brother from total ruin." The sheer delusion radiating from my mother was almost suffocating. She had twisted reality so severely that in her mind, my refusal to hand over my salary to her adult son was the direct cause of my father committing federal bank fraud. "Supported his dreams," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Let us talk about exactly how much of my life has already been sacrificed on the altar of Bradley's dreams. Let us talk about the year I turned 18. Do you remember that year, Mom? Because I remember it vividly." My mother's face tightened. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I raised my voice, cutting her off with the sharp, commanding tone I used in corporate interrogations. "I remember sitting at the kitchen table holding an acceptance letter to my dream university." I continued, staring directly into my mother's eyes. And I remember you and Dad sitting me down with tragic looks on your faces. You told me the economy had taken a massive downturn. You told me the investments in my college fund had been entirely wiped out by a bad market crash. You said you were so sorry, but I would have to take out student loans if I wanted to get a degree. My father looked away, staring intensely at the expensive carpet beneath his feet. Bradley suddenly looked extremely interested in his napkin, refusing to meet my gaze. I was 18 years old, I said, my voice rising with the weight of a decade and a half of suppressed anger. I believed you. I signed the paperwork. I took out $80,000 in high-interest student loans. I worked 2 jobs waiting tables off campus just to afford my textbooks and rent. I spent the entire first decade of my professional career eating ramen noodles and putting every extra penny I earned toward paying off that massive, suffocating debt. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment before delivering the final blow. And it was not until 5 years ago, when I first became a certified fraud investigator, that I finally had the skills and the clearance to quietly pull the historical property records for our county. My mother's face went entirely slack. The color completely drained from her cheeks. I looked at Bradley, who was now sweating profusely in his tailored suit. I found out that my college fund was not wiped out by the economy. I stated clearly, my words landing like hammer blows in the quiet dining room. The stock market did not crash that year. You and Dad liquidated the entire $80,000 account, and you used it as a cash down payment on a 4-bedroom suburban house for Bradley. He was 21 years old, he had just dropped out of his second community college, and you bought him a house with my education money. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp. She turned her head so fast her braids whipped across her shoulder. She stared at Bradley, her eyes wide with shock. "A house?" Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "What house? You never told me you owned a 4-bedroom house before we met. Where is it, Bradley? Where is the property?" I did not let Bradley answer. I answered for him. "He does not have the property." "Jasmine," I said, offering her a cold, pitying smile, "because exactly 18 months after my parents stole my future to buy him that house, the bank foreclosed on it." "Why did they foreclose?" "Because instead of paying the mortgage with the allowance Mom and Dad were secretly giving him, Bradley decided he needed to project success. So he went out and bought a customized wakeboarding boat. The bank took the house, they repossessed the boat, and the $80,000 my grandparents had saved for my education vanished into thin air." Jasmine looked like she was going to be physically sick. The illusion of her wealthy, successful entrepreneur husband was disintegrating right before her eyes. She was married to a man who had a history of catastrophic financial failures, bankruptcies, and foreclosures, all subsidized by the systematic robbery of his own family members. My mother backed into a corner with her deepest, darkest betrayal, laid bare for everyone to see, chose to double down. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her eyes burning with an irrational, desperate defiance. "We did what we had to do," Susan yelled, her voice echoing wildly in the small room. "You were always so capable, Olivia. You were so smart and so driven. We knew you would figure it out. We knew you would get the scholarships and the loans and you would survive." But Bradley was struggling. He was a sensitive boy. He needed a foundation to build his life on. He needed a place to call his own to give him confidence. We had to level the playing field. Level the playing field. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You did not give him a foundation, Mom. You gave him a crutch made out of my future. You punished me for being capable, and you rewarded him for being utterly incompetent. You expected me to carry the burden of my own survival while you handed him everything on a silver platter." I leaned forward, placing both of my hands flat on the table, matching my mother's aggressive posture, but maintaining absolute emotional control. "And that is exactly why you are never getting this car." I said, my words slow and deliberate. "You are never getting another dime from me, and you are never going to use me as a human shield to protect Bradley from the consequences of his own actions ever again. My father, who had been completely silenced by Grandma Beatrice's revelation, finally found a shred of his old arrogance. He stood up slowly, his massive frame attempting to reclaim the physical dominance he had lost. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," my father growled, pointing his heavy silver pen at me like a weapon. "I am still your father. I am still a vice president at the largest commercial bank in this city. You can bring up ancient history all you want, but you are not leaving this room with those keys. You have until the appetizer plates are cleared to sign this title transfer. If you do not, I will personally call my golfing partner. He happens to be the chief executive officer of your investigative firm. I will tell him you are financially abusing your elderly grandmother and causing a public scene. I will have you fired and blacklisted from the corporate sector before you even wake up tomorrow morning." I looked up at my father towering over me. He thought he had just played an unbeatable hand. He thought his professional connections would force me to surrender. I looked down at my watch, checking the time. "You do not need to wait until the appetizers are cleared, Dad," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. "You might want to look out the window, because the police are already outside." My father let out a harsh, booming laugh that lacked any genuine amusement. He thought I was bluffing. He genuinely believed that my warning about the police was just a desperate, empty threat from a daughter who was finally realizing she had lost the game. He pointed his heavy silver pen at me like a weapon. "You think you can bluff me, Olivia," he sneered, his chest puffing out with manufactured bravado. "You think you can sit there and conjure up imaginary police officers to scare your own father into backing down." He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He unlocked the screen with aggressive, forceful taps. "I am dialing William right now," my father declared, referring to the senior managing partner of my investigative firm. "We play 18 holes of golf every single Sunday at this very club. He respects me. He knows my character. When I tell him that his star corporate investigator is currently having a massive psychological breakdown in a public dining room, your career will be over." He held the phone up, ensuring I could see William's name illuminated on the bright screen. He pressed the call button and activated the speakerphone. The rhythmic ringing echoed sharply through the quiet room. "I will tell him you are financially abusing your elderly grandmother," my father continued, his voice dropping into a vicious, calculating rhythm. "I will tell him you are trying to extort your own family, that you are screaming and causing a public scene, and that you are mentally unfit to handle sensitive corporate accounts. You know how cautious the partners are about public relations. They will suspend you pending an internal review by tomorrow morning. You will be blacklisted across the entire financial sector. You will lose your investigative license, your stellar reputation, and your massive salary before the salads even arrive at this table." My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide with a sickening mix of fear and desperate hope. "Just sign the title transfer, Olivia," she pleaded, her voice trembling as she tapped the forged document. "Do not make your father destroy your career. You have worked so hard for your promotions. Do not throw your entire life away just to spite your brother. Sign the paper right now and he will hang up the phone. We can just move past this." Bradley scoffed, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms behind his head. "You always overplay your hand, Liv," he said with a smug, victorious grin. "You think you are the smartest person in the room just because you audit spreadsheets for a living? But Dad has actual power. He has real connections in this city. You are completely outmatched. Just give up and hand over the keys." Jasmine rolled her eyes, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet with a deep sigh. "Honestly, Olivia, you brought this entirely on yourself. You are being so incredibly dramatic. There are no police outside. Nobody is coming to save your car. You are just trying to stall because you know you have lost." I did not break eye contact with my father. The phone continued to ring on speaker, the sound filling the tense space between us. "Call him," I challenged, my voice deadly calm. "I dare you to speak to William. In fact, please make sure you tell him exactly why we are having this argument. Tell the senior partner of a fraud investigation firm that you are actively trying to extort me to cover up the fact that you committed federal bank fraud. Tell him you embezzled millions of dollars from grandfather's trust fund to finance Bradley's bankrupt application company. I am absolutely certain William will find that information fascinating. My father's jaw tightened. The phone rang for a fourth time. He opened his mouth to shout another threat, ready to double down on his intimidation tactics, but the words never came out. Because in that exact second, a sudden blinding flash of brilliant red and blue light swept across the sheer curtains of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The strobing colors pierced through the fabric painting the mahogany walls and the white tablecloth in a chaotic, rhythmic pulse of emergency lights. The blood instantly drained from my father's face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. The smartphone slipped from his trembling grip, dropping like a stone and clattering loudly against his porcelain breadplate. The speakerphone crackled to life. "Hello," Richard Williams' voice asked from the device, sounding confused. "Are you there?" My father did not answer. He was completely paralyzed, his eyes locked wide on the window. He reached over with the shaking hand and abruptly ended the call, cutting William off mid-sentence. I slowly turned my head and looked out through the glass. The Oakmont Country Club valet circle was no longer a scene of quiet luxury. Two heavy police cruisers were parked at jagged, aggressive angles directly behind my metallic gray Porsche Cayenne, effectively boxing the stolen vehicle in so it could not move an inch. 4 uniformed police officers were already stepping out of their cruisers, their hands resting cautiously on their heavy utility belts as they spoke to the terrified valet attendant. The silence in our private dining room was deafening. The arrogant smirks vanished from Bradley and Jasmine's faces as if they had been physically wiped away. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Bradley suddenly jumped up his chair, tipping violently backward and crashing onto the hardwood floor. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. He pointed a shaking finger at me, backing away from the table. "What did you do, Olivia?" "I did exactly what I said I was going to do," I replied, my tone completely conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I came home from a business trip in Chicago to find my $90,000 vehicle missing from my driveway. I called the police and reported it stolen. The dealership activated the internal GPS tracking module at my request, and I provided the police dispatcher with live updates on the vehicle's exact location. Did you honestly think you could joyride in a stolen luxury car park at a public country club and just get away with it because Mom said it was okay?" Jasmine leaped to her feet, her designer silk gown tangling around her legs. "You called the cops on your own brother," she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the mahogany walls. "You are completely insane. We are family." "You do not involve the authorities in a family dispute. It stopped being a family dispute the second he broke into my house and committed a felony," I corrected her smoothly, leaning back in my chair. "And it stopped being a family dispute the second your father decided to use my inheritance and my career as leverage to cover up your crimes." Grandma Beatrice remained seated at the head of the table. She had not flinched when the police lights illuminated the room. She simply reached out, picked up her crystal wine glass, and took a slow, appreciative sip. She watched my parents unravel with the calm satisfaction of a judge watching a guilty verdict being read aloud. My father was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive suit. He looked down at the Forge Department of Motor Vehicles title transfer still sitting on the table. He suddenly realized the massive legal jeopardy he had just placed himself in. If the police walked into the room and found a forged transfer document alongside a stolen vehicle, the situation would escalate from simple auto theft to a coordinated criminal conspiracy. He lunged forward, his heavy hands frantically clawing at the table to grab the document. He intended to tear it to pieces to destroy the evidence of his extortion attempt before the officers could walk through the heavy doors. But Grandma Beatrice was faster. She brought her silver-handled cane down with a sharp, vicious crack directly across my father's knuckles. My father yelped in pain, jerking his hand back and cradling it against his chest. "Do not touch that paper," Grandma Beatrice commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "That document is physical evidence of your attempt to defraud my granddaughter. It stays exactly where it is." My mother burst into loud, hysterical tears. She slid out of her chair and literally dropped to her knees right beside me. She grabbed the fabric of my dress, burying her face into my side. "Please, Olivia, please." My mother sobbed, her entire body shaking as the police lights continued to flash through the room. "You have to tell them it is a misunderstanding. You have to tell them you lent him the car. If Bradley gets arrested, it will ruin his life. His investors will drop him. He will go to prison. You cannot do this to your own blood." I looked down at the woman who had spent 35 years actively tearing me down to build my brother up. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no guilt, no sadness. Just a cold, heavy finality. I gently but firmly peeled her desperate fingers off my clothing and stepped back. "He ruined his own life, Mom," I said quietly, "and you helped him do it." The heavy mahogany doors to the private dining room suddenly swung wide open. The Oakmont restaurant manager stepped inside, his face pale and sweating. Behind him stood two uniformed police officers, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on our table. The two uniformed officers stepped past the trembling restaurant manager and walked directly toward our table. Their heavy black boots thudded against the polished hardwood floor. The heavy utility belts around their waists creaked with every step, an unmistakable sound of authority that instantly sucked whatever remaining oxygen there was out of the room. The soft jazz music playing overhead seemed to mock the absolute terror paralyzing my family. Bradley was holding a half-empty crystal wine glass. As the first officer locked eyes with him, Bradley's hand began to shake violently. His fingers simply gave out. The glass slipped from his grip and plummeted toward the floor. It hit the edge of the mahogany table on its way down, shattering into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces. Dark red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and splattered onto his expensive leather shoes like fresh blood. Nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody even breathed. "Excuse me," the lead officer said, his voice deep and commanding, carrying no hint of the polite deference my family was used to receiving in this country club. "We received a report from the registered owner of a metallic gray Porsche Cayenne parked outside. Dispatch indicated the owner is actively tracking the vehicle and is currently at this location." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress. I kept my hands entirely visible and my posture relaxed. "That would be me, officer," I said, clearly ensuring my voice projected across the room. "My name is Olivia. I am the registered owner of the vehicle. I called 911 20 minutes ago." The second officer pulled out a small notepad. "Thank you, ma'am. Can you confirm who was driving the vehicle when it arrived at this establishment?" I did not even have to point. Every single eye at the table, including Grandma Beatrice's, naturally shifted toward Bradley. Bradley was staring at the shattered glass around his feet, his chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. He looked like he was about to pass out. The lead officer took a step closer to Bradley, resting his hand casually near his radio. "Sir, did you drive the Porsche parked in the valet circle?" Bradley opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, high-pitched squeak came out. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward my father, begging for the patriarch to step in and use his magical banking connections to make the police go away. But my father was completely frozen, his face still a sickly shade of gray, terrified that the forged title transfer on the table would be discovered. "It was not him," Jasmine suddenly screamed, her voice shattering the tense silence like a siren. Everyone turned to look at my sister-in-law. Jasmine had leaped out of her chair, her designer silk gown swishing violently around her legs. She was backing away from Bradley as if he were suddenly highly contagious. Her carefully constructed mask of elegance and superiority had completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated self-preservation. "He told me it was a gift," Jasmine yelled, pointing an accusing finger directly at her husband's face. "He told me your parents gave it to him. He said Olivia signed the paperwork this morning. I had absolutely no idea it was stolen. I am just a passenger. I have absolutely nothing to do with this." "Jasmine, what are you doing?" Bradley hissed, his voice cracking in sheer panic. He reached out to grab her arm, but she slapped his hand away with vicious force. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her eyes wide and wild. "You lied to me. You told me the business was fine. You told me the bank approved the new bridge loan. And then you show up with a $90,000 stolen car and tell me we are using it for collateral. You are dragging me down with you, and I will not let you do it." The words tumbled out of her mouth like a waterfall, a desperate confession born of pure terror. My father let out a low, guttural groan, dropping his head into his hands. He knew exactly what Jasmine had just done. In her frantic attempt to clear her own name regarding the theft, she had just openly confessed to the motive behind it in front of 2 police officers. The lead officer immediately stopped taking notes and looked up, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, did you just say he was using a stolen vehicle as collateral for a bank loan?" Jasmine froze, realizing her massive mistake a second too late. She looked at the officer, then at Bradley, and finally at my father, who was glaring at her with a look of murderous rage. She covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head frantically. I stepped out from behind my chair, closing the distance between myself and the officers. "I can clarify that, officer," I said smoothly. "My brother's business is bankrupt. He recently applied for a massive commercial bridge loan to avoid total default. However, he lacked the assets to secure it. So my parents broke into my home, stole my vehicle, and handed it over to him so he could pledge it as collateral to a regional bank." Bradley's face went from pale to a deep flushed crimson. "Shut up, Olivia," he screamed, his golden boy facade entirely destroyed. He looked at the officers, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "She is lying. She is a jealous, bitter liar. My father is a vice president at that bank. He approved the loan himself. He knows everything is completely legal. Tell them, Dad. Tell them you handled the paperwork." It was like watching a man actively tying his own noose and begging his family to kick away the stool. Bradley was so accustomed to my father shielding him from consequences that he genuinely thought invoking my father's position at the bank would intimidate the police. Instead, he had just formally accused a bank executive of orchestrating a fraudulent commercial loan using stolen property. My father slowly lowered his hands from his face. He looked at his son with an expression of profound, crushing defeat. "You idiot," my father whispered, his voice completely hollow. "You absolute idiot." The 2 police officers exchanged a very long, very meaningful look. The situation had just escalated from a straightforward auto theft to a complex federal financial crime involving an executive at a major financial institution. The lead officer unclipped his radio from his belt and brought it to his mouth. "Dispatch, we are going to need a supervisor at this location, and go ahead and contact the Financial Crimes Unit to see if we have a detective on call. We have a suspect admitting to loan fraud and implicating a bank officer." The sound of the radio transmission crackled through the quiet room, sealing their fate. The unified front of my toxic family had completely collapsed. The invisible bonds of manipulation, guilt, and loyalty that had kept them functioning for decades were severed the moment actual legal consequences entered the room. It was truly spectacular to witness. They were a pack of wolves that had finally been cornered, and their first instinct was to tear each other to pieces just to survive another day. My mother, still kneeling on the floor near my chair, began to rock back and forth, weeping uncontrollably. She looked like a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant woman who had demanded I surrender my keys just 20 minutes prior. Bradley sank back down into his chair, his elbows resting on the table, his hands pulling frantically at his hair as he muttered to himself in absolute denial. Jasmine was actively trying to edge her way toward the door, hoping the police would just forget she was there so she could slip away into the night. But the heavy mahogany doors remained blocked by the restaurant manager and the two officers. There was no escape. The private dining room with its luxurious decor and crystal chandeliers had officially become a holding cell. Grandma Beatrice tapped her cane against the hardwood floor, cutting through the sound of my mother's sobbing. She looked directly at me, a glimmer of genuine pride shining in her sharp eyes. "Well done, Olivia," Grandma Beatrice said quietly, her voice steady and resolute. "You finally burned it down." I looked back at my grandmother and nodded once. The fire was raging, consuming every lie they had ever told. But I was not quite finished yet. I still had one final piece of evidence to present, the ultimate proof that would ensure my father could never ever rebuild the financial empire he had used to terrorize me my entire life. The lead officer lowered his radio and crossed his arms over his heavy tactical vest. He instructed everyone to remain exactly where they were until the supervisor and the financial crimes detective arrived. The heavy mahogany doors remained guarded, transforming the opulent private dining room into a suffocating holding cell. The silence that followed his command lasted only a few seconds before the immense pressure caused the final remnants of Jasmine's sanity to violently shatter. She could not sit down. She paced back and forth in her designer silk gown, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she ran her shaking hands through her perfectly styled hair. She stopped and slowly turned her head toward Bradley. The look of absolute disgust on her face was so profound it almost made me pity him. Almost. "A stolen car?" Bradley, Jasmine asked, her voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of rage and sheer panic. "You secured our bridge loan with a stolen car." Bradley shrank back into his chair, his eyes darting nervously toward the two police officers who were standing just a few feet away, silently listening to every word. "Jasmine, stop talking," he pleaded in a desperate, breathy whisper. "Just sit down and let Dad handle the lawyers. You are making it worse." "I am making it worse," Jasmine shrieked, entirely abandoning any pretense of country club etiquette. "You told me the capital was for your new artificial intelligence startup. You told me the investors were lined up and you just needed a massive injection of cash to show good faith to the developers." She took a step toward him, pointing a shaking finger directly at his chest. "But the startup is entirely fake, Bradley. It does not even exist. You do not have developers. You do not have an engineering team. You just have a leased office space downtown with a fancy espresso machine and a website you built yourself. You took out a massive high-interest bridge loan with a predatory private lender because every traditional bank in this city laughed you right out of their lobby." Bradley's face turned an ugly mottled purple. He looked around the room frantically, realizing his wife was publicly exposing him as a complete fraud in front of law enforcement and his wealthy grandmother. "Jasmine, I swear to you the business model is solid. We are just in stealth mode right now. I just needed the Porsche to leverage the capital until the first round of seed funding cleared." Jasmine let out a harsh, hysterical laugh that echoed wildly off the walls. "Seed funding," she mocked, her voice echoing with the crushing realization of her impending poverty. "There is no funding. You needed collateral because you are broke. And you told me your parents signed the title of that vehicle over to you legally. You told me it was a gift. Do you understand what you have done to us?" She grabbed the edge of the white tablecloth, her knuckles turning white. "If this car is impounded tonight as stolen property, the loan covenant is instantly breached. They will instantly default the account. You put our primary residence up as secondary collateral, Bradley. They will put a lien on our house by tomorrow morning. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything because you wanted to play pretend CEO with your sister's birthday present." I watched Jasmine unravel, noting how quickly she calculated the financial devastation. She did not care that I had been robbed. She only cared that the stolen asset was no longer available to fund her luxurious lifestyle. She had happily gone along with the theft when she thought they had gotten away with it. Her outrage was entirely born of self-preservation. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, steepling my fingers together. I looked at Bradley, who was currently burying his face in his hands, completely destroyed by his wife's brutal public autopsy of his fake career. "So that is why you needed it," I said, my voice cutting through Jasmine's hysterical sobbing with cold, clinical precision. Bradley slowly raised his head, looking at me with bloodshot, terrified eyes. I kept my gaze locked on him, watching the last shreds of his golden boy arrogance bleed out. "You could not just go to a normal bank for a business loan, because the banking system flagged your social security number for fraud, just like when you forged Dad's signature in 2021. My father let out a strangled gasp. "Olivia, shut your mouth," he croaked, his voice cracking violently. "Do not say another word." But my father had no authority here anymore. His threats were empty, his power broken. I turned my attention to the two police officers, ensuring they heard every single syllable of the history my family had tried so desperately to bury. In 2021, I explained calmly my brother wanted to open a boutique fitness center. He lacked the credit score to secure a commercial lease. So he drafted a fraudulent guarantor agreement and forged our father's signature to secure a highly expensive retail space downtown. When the landlord discovered the forgery 3 months later, after Bradley missed every single rent payment, my father stepped in. I looked back at my father. He was staring at the floor, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. Dad quietly paid the landlord $80,000 in penalties to keep the police from being called. He covered up the crime to protect his precious son. But the commercial real estate agency reported the incident to the credit bureaus. Bradley was permanently flagged for financial fraud. No reputable institution will ever lend him a single dime. Jasmine stopped pacing. She stood perfectly still, her eyes wide with horror as she processed my words. She slowly turned her head and looked at my father. "You covered up a forgery," Jasmine whispered, her voice barely audible. "You let me marry him, thinking his credit was perfect. You let me put my name on the mortgage of our house, knowing he was a documented fraud risk." My father could not even look at her. He just shook his head silently, his hands trembling violently on his lap. He had spent his entire life trying to engineer a false reality where his son was a brilliant success, and the sheer weight of maintaining that lie had finally crushed him. That is why he needed the Porsche, Jasmine. I continued laying out the final pieces of the puzzle for her. He needed a tangible, high-value physical asset to hand over to a shady private lender. It was the only way he could get cash to fund his fake tech startup. And Mom and Dad were perfectly willing to let him steal it from me because they knew it was his absolute last chance before total bankruptcy. Jasmine looked at Bradley. Her expression shifted from panic to absolute freezing hatred. She reached up and unclasped her heavy diamond tennis bracelet. She let it drop onto the table. It landed right next to the forged title transfer document with a heavy, expensive clatter. "I am filing for divorce," Jasmine stated, her voice suddenly entirely devoid of emotion. "I am calling my lawyer the second I am allowed to leave this room. I am taking whatever equity is left in that house, and I am leaving you. You are a pathetic, lying thief, and I will not let you drag me into federal prison with you." She turned her back on him, walking over to the far corner of the room and crossing her arms, physically distancing herself from the radioactive fallout of my brother's life. Bradley reached out toward her, his hand trembling in the empty air. "Jasmine, please!" he begged, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "Please do not do this. We can fix it. Dad can fix it. Dad knows people." But Dad could not fix it. My father was currently staring at the forged Department of Motor Vehicles title transfer, sitting on the table directly in front of him. The document he had tried to force me to sign. The document that explicitly connected him to the theft of the vehicle and the subsequent loan fraud. He knew the financial crimes detective was on the way, and he knew that piece of paper was a one-way ticket to a federal indictment. Grandma Beatrice watched the entire collapse with the serene satisfaction of a chess master who had just cornered the king. She picked up her cloth napkin, elegantly dabbed the corners of her mouth, and placed it neatly beside her plate. I believe Grandma Beatrice said softly, breaking the heavy silence, that this has been the most illuminating birthday dinner of my entire life. The heavy silence in the private dining room was suffocating. The two uniformed patrol officers remained stationed by the mahogany doors, their presence transforming the luxurious country club space into a secure holding area. We were all trapped in a suspended reality, waiting for the financial crime supervisor to arrive. For my family, every passing second was a ticking clock counting down to their absolute ruin. My mother could not handle the quiet. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on her, shattering the delusional world she had constructed to protect her golden child. She let out a guttural, wretched sob and dragged herself across the polished hardwood floor. She literally dropped to her knees right beside my chair. The heavy silk fabric of her expensive evening gown bunched up around her legs, soaking up the spilled wine from Bradley's shattered glass. But she did not even seem to care. She reached out with trembling hands and gripped the armrest of my chair. "Olivia, please?" My mother begged, her voice hoarse and wet with tears. "Look at me. Please just look at me. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. You cannot do this to us. You cannot sit there and let them send your father and your brother to prison." I slowly turned my head and looked down at her. This was the classic abuser-turned-victim flip. I had seen it 100 times in my line of work. When the fraudster is finally cornered, when the undeniable evidence is laid out on the table, they instantly drop the arrogant facade and adopt the role of the helpless martyr. They weaponize guilt, demanding empathy from the very people they just spent years destroying. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. "You did this to yourselves, Mom," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotional warmth. "You chose to break into my house. You chose to steal my property. You chose to forge documents to cover up a fraudulent commercial loan. I simply refused to be a compliant victim." "But we are family," Susan wailed, her fingers clawing frantically at the fabric of my chair. "We made mistakes. Yes. We were desperate. Bradley was in so much trouble and we just wanted to help him survive." "You have a good heart, Olivia. I know you do. Just tell the officers you gave him permission to take the car. Tell them it was a misunderstanding over the paperwork. We will give the car back right now. We will never ask you for anything ever again. I swear it on my life." She was bargaining. She genuinely believed that she could negotiate her way out of federal bank fraud by promising to finally leave me alone. It was a staggering display of narcissism. She thought the law functioned like our family dynamic, where apologies were meaningless and consequences could be erased if she just cried hard enough. "You do not have the power to negotiate anymore," I told her, keeping my posture rigid. Jasmine just confessed to the entire scheme in front of 2 police officers. She gave them the motive, the method, and the specific financial institution involved. "Even if I suddenly lost my mind and lied to the police for you, the bank audit will bury you anyway. It is entirely out of my hands." My mother let out a horrific wail, burying her face into her hands. She rocked back and forth on her knees, mourning the loss of her perfect suburban life, mourning the destruction of her country club reputation, and mourning the fact that she could no longer control me. Across the table, my father was not crying. Richard was a man who had spent his entire career mitigating risk and hiding assets. His mind was rapidly calculating the sheer volume of evidence stacked against him. His eyes darted wildly around the room, landing on Jasmine trembling in the corner, then shifting to the 2 patrol officers guarding the door and finally locking onto the table directly in front of me. Sitting on the white tablecloth mere inches from my water glass was the forged Department of Motor Vehicles title transfer document. Right next to it sat my smartphone, which I had just used to coordinate with the police dispatcher. In my father's panicked, irrational state, he convinced himself that if he could just destroy that piece of paper, he could deny his involvement in the loan fraud. He believed he could shift all the blame onto Bradley and walk away clean. The desperation completely overrode his common sense. With a sudden, violent burst of energy, my father lunged across the wide mahogany table. He completely ignored the fine china and the crystal glassware. His heavy chest slammed into the edge of the table, knocking over a pitcher of ice water. The cold water spilled rapidly across the tablecloth, soaking into the fabric. He stretched his thick arms out, his fingers desperately clawing toward the forged document and my smartphone. "Give me the paper!" Richard roared. His face twisted into a mask of pure, primal panic. "Give it to me right now!" He was incredibly fast for a man his age, driven by the sheer terror of spending his retirement in a federal penitentiary. His thick fingers brushed the edge of the official registration envelope. I instinctively leaned back, pulling myself out of his reach, but I did not even have time to grab the documents myself. Grandma Beatrice reacted with the speed and precision of a seasoned predator. She did not shout. She did not gasp. She simply tightened her grip on the heavy silver handle of her cane, raised it high into the air, and brought it down with devastating force. The solid wood shaft of the cane cracked violently against the back of my father's outstretched hand. The sickening sound of impact echoed sharply in the room. My father let out a high-pitched howl of agony. He instantly recoiled, pulling his hand back and clutching it tightly against his chest. He stumbled backward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he lost his balance and crashed heavily onto his knees. "I told you not to touch that evidence," Richard. Grandma Beatrice said, her voice dropping into a deadly commanding register that left absolutely no room for debate. "You have embarrassed this family enough for one lifetime. You will sit there like a civilized human being, and you will face the consequences of your pathetic choices." The sudden burst of physical violence immediately triggered the two patrol officers at the door. They stepped forward in unison, their hands instinctively dropping to the heavy tasers secured on their utility belts. "Hey, back away from the table!" the lead officer shouted, pointing a stern finger directly at my father, who was currently whimpering on the floor and cradling his bruised hand. "Keep your hands visible and stay exactly where you are. Do not make another sudden movement, or I will deploy my weapon. Do you understand me?" My father nodded frantically, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. He did not dare speak. He simply kneeled on the hardwood floor, utterly defeated, looking up at his own mother with an expression of pure terror. My mother was still sobbing beside my chair, entirely paralyzed by the chaos unfolding around her. Bradley was sitting perfectly still, his eyes wide and vacant, completely disassociated from reality. The golden child had finally broken under the pressure of the real world. Jasmine remained pressed against the far wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the wealthy family she had married into completely self-destruct in real time. I reached out calmly, picked up my smartphone, and slid the forged title transfer document slightly further away from the edge of the table, ensuring it remained perfectly intact. The physical evidence was secure. The confession had been made. The trap was entirely sealed. At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany doors were pushed wide open. The restaurant manager stepped aside, looking absolutely terrified. Walking through the doorway were two new figures dressed in sharp plainclothes suits. They wore silver badges clipped to their belts and carried heavy leather folders. The financial crimes detectives had finally arrived. The long wait was over, and the real reckoning was about to begin. The two plainclothes detectives stepped fully into the room, their expressions entirely devoid of sympathy. The atmosphere instantly shifted from a chaotic family meltdown to an active crime scene. The taller detective in the front scanned the room, his eyes sweeping over my sobbing mother, passing over my grandmother sitting rigidly at the head of the table, and finally landing on my brother. Bradley immediately raised both of his hands into the air, his palms facing outward in a gesture of absolute surrender. His face was slick with sweat, and his whole body trembled violently. "I swear I did not know she had not signed the paperwork yet." Bradley stammered, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "My parents told me it was a legal gift. I am just the victim of a miscommunication. Please do not arrest me." The two detectives did not even break their stride. They walked right past Bradley, ignoring his frantic pleading as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture. The sudden breeze of their passing ruffled the lapels of his tailored suit, leaving him standing there with his hands in the air, completely bewildered. They marched directly toward the opposite side of the table and stopped right in front of my father. Richard was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, nursing the hand that Grandma Beatrice had just struck with her cane. He looked up, his eyes widening in genuine confusion as the two federal detectives towered over him. The patrol officers had secured the door, but these men were the real threat, and my father's corporate instincts desperately tried to kick in. He scrambled to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his knees. He awkwardly smoothed down the front of his charcoal suit with his uninjured hand, attempting to summon the authoritative, booming presence he had used to terrorize our family for decades. "Gentlemen," my father said, forcing a tight, highly unnatural smile. "I am Richard, Vice President of Regional Lending at Continental Commercial. I assure you, whatever the patrol officers called you in for, it is a massive overreaction. My son simply made a foolish mistake regarding a vehicle transfer with his sister. It is a private family dispute that we are resolving internally right now." The taller detective reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a leather badge holder, flipping it open to display a heavy silver shield. "I am Detective Gallagher, with the Financial Crimes Division," the man said, his voice flat and uncompromising. "We are not here about a stolen vehicle, Richard. The patrol division is currently processing your son for grand theft auto. We are here regarding a $300,000 commercial bridge loan approved at your branch yesterday afternoon." The fake smile instantly vanished from my father's face. The last remaining drops of color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a walking corpse. He opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He took a stumbling half-step backward, his legs suddenly struggling to support his massive frame. My mother abruptly stopped crying. She wiped her mascara-stained eyes and looked up at my father, her face contorting in fresh horror. "Alone," Susan whispered, her voice barely audible. "Richard, what are they talking about? What did you do?" My father did not answer her. He could not even look at her. He was staring at the heavy leather folder tucked under Detective Gallagher's arm, realizing that his entire life was inside it. I stepped out from behind my chair and walked slowly toward my father. The sheer panic radiating from him was palpable. For 35 years, I had watched this man use his banking career as a weapon. He had used his wealth and his executive title to control my mother, to bail out my brother, and to make me feel small and insignificant. He had constantly reminded me that he was a master of the financial universe, while I was just a disappointment. "You never actually asked what my exact job title was, Dad," I said calmly, crossing my arms over my chest and standing right next to the detectives. My father slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "Whenever you talked about me to your country club friends," I continued, my voice echoing clearly through the silent dining room, "you told them I was just a low-level corporate drone. You told Bradley I audited boring spreadsheets in my sweatpants. You mocked me for working from home. You assumed I was just pushing papers around for some mid-tier accounting firm, because you could never fathom your daughter being more successful than your golden boy son." I took a step closer, ensuring he heard every single word. "I am a senior corporate fraud investigator, Dad. I do not just push papers. I dismantle entire financial syndicates. I trace laundered money across international borders. And for the past 6 months, my investigative firm was contracted by the Federal Banking Commission to conduct a silent, comprehensive audit of your specific commercial bank branch." The room went dead silent. Jasmine let out a sharp, involuntary gasp from the corner. Grandma Beatrice leaned forward in her chair, her eyes shining with absolute fascination. Bradley looked like he was going to vomit right onto the mahogany floor. My father stared at me, his jaw trembling. "You audited my branch." He whispered the words, scraping out of his throat like dry sandpaper. "You have been watching my accounts. I have been watching every single keystroke you made," I confirmed, letting the cold reality wash over him. "We were hired because the federal regulators flagged severe compliance irregularities in your commercial lending department. They suspected an executive was bypassing secondary authorization protocols to approve high-risk loans. They just did not know who it was, but I found you, Dad. Found you. I watched you falsify income verification documents. I watched you force a junior loan officer to rubber stamp Bradley's fake application. You do not understand, my father pleaded, his voice breaking as his arrogant patriarch persona entirely collapsed. I was going to fix it. The application was just a placeholder. I was going to use my end-of-year executive bonus to quietly pay off the bridge loan before the quarterly audit. It was just a temporary maneuver to get Bradley the cash he needed to launch the software. I was protecting my family. You were protecting your ego. I shot back, completely immune to his sudden display of vulnerability. You could not stomach the idea of your friends finding out your son was a multiple-time bankrupt failure, so you broke federal banking laws to keep the illusion alive. But you got sloppy, Dad. You were so arrogant, so used to doing whatever you wanted, that you thought nobody would ever question a vice president. I gestured toward Detective Gallagher's leather folder. You needed collateral to force the loan through the automated underwriting system. You needed a tangible asset worth at least $90,000 to make the algorithms accept the risk. But Bradley had absolutely nothing. His credit is destroyed, his house is heavily mortgaged, and his business does not exist. So you decided to steal my birthday present. My mother let out a horrific wail, finally understanding the full, devastating scope of the nightmare. She buried her face in her hands, rocking back and forth on the floor as the life she knew disintegrated around her. How did you know? My father asked, his voice entirely devoid of life. He looked at me with the vacant stare of a man who had already accepted his execution. How did you know about the car before tonight? I smiled. It was a cold, clinical expression. I did not need to wait for you to bring the car to the country club, Dad. I was monitoring your fraudulent loan application in real time from my hotel room in Chicago. When the collateral asset was officially entered into the banking system yesterday afternoon, it triggered an alert on my dashboard. I pulled up the vehicle identification number you submitted to the underwriter. I instantly recognized it. It was the exact same metallic gray Porsche Cayenne sitting in my driveway. You used my own stolen property to finalize a federal financial crime while I was actively auditing your digital footprint, I said, shaking my head in genuine disbelief at his sheer stupidity. You literally handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to completely destroy your career and send you to federal prison. Detective Gallagher stepped forward, cutting off whatever pathetic excuse my father was about to formulate. Richard, he said sharply, gesturing toward the empty space near the far wall. Step away from the table. Keep your hands where I can see them. We are going to need you to answer some very specific questions regarding your authorization codes. My father did not argue. He did not threaten to call his golfing buddies. He simply lowered his head and shuffled slowly toward the wall, looking like a broken, hollow shell of a man. The terrifying tyrant who had ruled my childhood with an iron fist had been completely eradicated by a trail of digital paperwork he thought he was smart enough to hide. But I was not quite finished. I turned my attention back to the dining table, where my designer purse was still sitting next to my water glass. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was time to show the rest of the family exactly what happens when you mistake my quiet independence for weakness. I flipped open the heavy manila folder. The crisp sound of the thick paper snapping against the mahogany table drew every eye in the room. I began dealing the official bank documents onto the white tablecloth, like a casino dealer handing out a universally losing hand. I placed them carefully, avoiding the dark stains of the spilled red wine and the scattered shards of crystal from my brother's dropped glass. Here is the initial commercial loan application submitted by Bradley 2 days ago, I said, tapping the first stack of papers. You will notice the claimed annual revenue for his imaginary software company is listed at $2.5 million. I also included the falsified tax returns he provided to support that completely fabricated number. Detective Gallagher stepped away from my father and walked over to my side of the table. He leaned over the documents, his professional demeanor remaining entirely stoic as his eyes scanned the highlighted sections. And here I continued laying down a second stack of papers featuring the official logo of my father's bank. Are the internal system logs from the underwriting department. The automated risk assessment algorithm instantly rejected Bradley's application. It flagged his social security number for his previous commercial lease forgery and noted a catastrophic debt-to-income ratio. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It locked him out. I looked over at my father. He was leaning heavily against the mahogany wall, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. He looked like a man watching his own autopsy performed live. But a rejection was not acceptable for a vice president trying to protect his family image. I said, my voice projecting clearly so my mother could hear every single devastating detail. I laid down the final set of documents. These were printed wire transfer receipts and internal executive override logs. So, at exactly 4:15 yesterday afternoon, my father used his senior executive credentials to manually bypass the automated rejection. He entered an override code citing a verified physical collateral asset. He manually approved the transfer of $300,000 of the bank's capital directly into an account controlled by Bradley. Detective Gallagher picked up the wire transfer receipt, tracing the routing numbers with his pen. He used a stolen vehicle to secure the override, the detective confirmed, looking up at me. Exactly, I nodded. He attached the vehicle identification number of my Porsche Cayenne to the loan file. He knew he did not have the physical title yet, but he assumed he could simply bully me into signing it tonight at this dinner. He thought he could backdate the title transfer tomorrow morning before the compliance department ever noticed the discrepancy. It was incredibly sloppy, desperate work. My mother let out a horrific guttural wail from the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her silk gown stained and wrinkled, and lunged toward my father. "Richard, tell them it is not true!" Susan shrieked, grabbing the lapels of his charcoal suit. "Tell them you did not wire the money. If you stole bank funds, they will take everything. They will take my house. They will take your pension. You are going to federal prison. Tell me you did not do this." My father could not even look at his wife. He stared blankly at the floor, his entire body trembling. The sheer weight of the federal statutes he had violated was finally crushing him. He was a banker. He knew exactly what the sentencing guidelines were for wire fraud, bank fraud, and the circumvention of internal corporate controls. He was looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. His prestigious career, his country club memberships, his massive retirement accounts, everything was gone in the blink of an eye. Jasmine stood frozen in the corner of the room. She was staring at the wire transfer documents on the table with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. $300,000, Jasmine whispered to herself, her eyes darting toward Bradley. You took $300,000 of stolen money. The federal government is going to seize all our shared accounts. They are going to freeze my assets. She turned her venomous gaze back to Bradley, who was currently slouched in his chair, looking entirely catatonic. You ruined my life, Jasmine spat, her voice laced with absolute poison. You and your psychotic father destroyed my entire life. Detective Gallagher signaled to his partner, who immediately pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic clicking sound echoed through the dining room as the partner walked over to my father. "Richard, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the partner ordered. "You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand theft." My father did not resist. He slowly turned around, placing his hands behind his back. As the cold steel locked around his wrists, the terrifying tyrant who had ruled my childhood was officially dead. He was just a pathetic, broken old man who had sacrificed his freedom to feed his son's bottomless entitlement. I watched the officers secure my father, feeling a profound sense of closure. The financial trap I had set was perfectly executed. I had successfully protected my assets and neutralized the people who had tried to steal my future. I thought the absolute peak of the evening had been reached. I was wrong. Because Grandma Beatrice had not made her final move yet. The matriarch of our family sat perfectly upright at the head of the table. She had watched the arrest of her own son with the calm, detached interest of someone watching a predictable stage play. She reached out and tapped the silver handle of her cane against her water glass, producing a sharp, ringing chime that immediately demanded everyone's attention. The detectives paused. My mother stopped her hysterical sobbing and looked up, her face a mess of ruined makeup in sheer terror. That was a remarkably thorough investigation. Olivia, Grandma Beatrice said, her voice smooth and entirely composed. You have proven yourself to be exceptionally competent. However, there is one small detail regarding the vehicle that I believe the detectives will find highly relevant to their criminal conspiracy charges. I looked at my grandmother, genuinely surprised. I had tracked the car via the standard dealership GPS application. I had no idea what she was talking about. Grandma Beatrice reached into her elegant leather handbag sitting beside her chair. She pulled out a sleek silver iPad and placed it carefully onto the white tablecloth. She unlocked the screen with a few quick taps of her wrinkled fingers. When I purchased the Porsche for Olivia last week, Grandma Beatrice explained, addressing the room, but keeping her sharp eyes locked directly on Bradley, I did not buy it as a standard retail consumer. I purchased it through my late husband's corporate security fleet account. Because of the high value of the vehicles in that specific fleet portfolio, the insurance underwriters require a comprehensive passive surveillance package to be installed at the factory. Bradley suddenly sat up straight in his chair. The catatonic stupor vanished, replaced by a fresh, blinding wave of panic. He stared at the iPad resting on the table as if it were an unexploded bomb. Passive surveillance, Detective Gallagher asked, stepping closer to the table and looking down at the screen. Yes, Detective Grandma Beatrice confirmed with a tight, dangerous smile. The vehicle is equipped with a concealed high-definition dash camera and a continuously recording cabin microphone. The system automatically uploads the encrypted audio and video files directly to my private cloud server the moment the ignition is engaged. I received a notification on my tablet the second the vehicle was started in Olivia's driveway this evening. My mother gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. You knew, Susan whispered, staring at Grandma Beatrice in absolute shock. You knew they stole the car before we even sat down for dinner. Why did you not say anything? Why would I interrupt an enemy while they are making a fatal mistake? Grandma Beatrice replied coldly, completely dismissing my mother's outrage. I wanted to see exactly how far my son and my grandson were willing to go to steal from my granddaughter. And more importantly, I wanted to hear exactly what they were saying when they thought nobody was listening. Grandma Beatrice tapped the screen of the iPad. I highly suggest everyone remain quiet for the next 2 minutes, she instructed. The audio quality is quite exceptional. The dining room went completely silent. Even the soft jazz music from the main hall seemed to fade away. From the small speakers of the tablet, the unmistakable sound of a heavy car door slamming shut echoed into the room. Then the low, powerful rumble of the Porsche engine starting up filled the air. I heard my brother's voice, perfectly clear and remarkably relaxed. This thing drives like an absolute spaceship, Bradley's recorded voice said. I cannot believe the old man actually pulled this off. Then came Jasmine's voice, equally clear, filtering through the speakers with a smug, victorious tone. I told you your parents would handle her. Olivia is totally spineless. She will complain for a few days, but she will sign the title over. She always caves when your dad yells at her. I watched Jasmine shrink against the wall. She closed her eyes tightly, unable to look at the detectives who were now listening to her actively confessing to her full knowledge of the premeditated theft and extortion plot. Yeah, well, Dad did not do this out of the goodness of his heart. Bradley's recorded voice laughed. He is terrified. If this bridge loan does not go through, his precious branch gets audited by the federal regulators. He is using Liv's car to save his own skin. It is honestly pathetic how easy it is to manipulate him. Just tell him I am stressed and he completely folds. My father closed his eyes, his head dropping forward as the steel handcuffs clinked behind his back. Hearing his golden child, the son he had just destroyed his entire life for openly mocking him as a pathetic, easily manipulated tool was a punishment far worse than any prison sentence. But the recording was not over. So what happens when the loan clears? Jasmine's recorded voice asked over the hum of the engine. Are you actually going to pay your parents back for the down payment they gave us? Are you joking? Bradley's voice scoffed loudly. They are completely tapped out. Dad secretly leveraged his own retirement accounts to cover up that lease disaster 3 years ago. They have absolutely nothing left. In fact, once the business scales and we cash out the seed funding, we need to talk about putting them in a home. A home? Jasmine asked, sounding intrigued. Yeah, Bradley replied casually. A state facility. I am not having them move into our guest house. Mom is way too clingy and Dad is constantly complaining. Once we drain whatever is left in their checking accounts to cover the marketing budget, we just drop them at a state-run nursing facility and let Medicare figure it out. We deserve our own space, babe. We earned it. The crisp, high-definition audio continued to play through the small speakers of the tablet, filling the absolute silence of the private dining room. Jasmine let out a sharp, cruel laugh on the recording. Honestly, a state facility is better than they deserve. Jasmine's recorded voice sneered over the hum of the stolen car engine. Your mother is completely insufferable. She treats me like the help just because I do not come from country club money. But do you really think Medicare will cover it? What if the state facilities are full? Do you think Olivia will pay for a private room for them? Bradley chuckled, a dark, dismissive sound that made my stomach turn. Liv. Oh, absolutely. We just cry to her about how broke we are and she will write the check. She always wants to be the savior of this family. She is so stupidly predictable. Once we have the title to this Porsche, we leverage the cash, scale the business, and leave my parents for Liv to deal with. They are her problem now. Grandma Beatrice reached out a single wrinkled finger and tapped the screen of the tablet. The audio cut off instantly. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than a physical weight. It pressed down on everyone in the room, suffocating and absolute. My mother remained on the floor. She did not cry. She did not scream. She just stared at Bradley with wide, unblinking eyes. The illusion she had spent 32 years meticulously crafting, the illusion of her brilliant, loving golden child, completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her. She looked as though she were physically aging in real time, the color completely draining from her face, leaving behind deep, hollow shadows. A state facility, my mother whispered. The words barely made it past her lips. She slowly pushed herself up off the hardwood floor, her movements stiff and jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. She did not bother to brush off her ruined silk gown. She just took a slow, agonizing step toward the chair where Bradley was sitting. Mom, listen to me. Bradley stammered, his voice jumping up an entire octave in sheer panic. He pressed his back hard against the chair, trying to put physical distance between himself and the hollowed-out shell of his mother. It was just talk. I was just blowing off steam. Jasmine was stressing me out about the loan, and I just said what she wanted to hear. You know I would never do that to you. You know how much I love you. Do not you dare try to pin that on me. Jasmine shrieked from the corner of the room, her voice cracking with terror. You brought it up. You called them a burden. I was just agreeing with you. My mother did not even look at Jasmine. Her eyes remained entirely fixed on Bradley. I gave you everything, Susan said, her voice eerily calm, devoid of the hysterical theatrics she normally employed. I fought with your father for you. I alienated your sister for you. I emptied my savings accounts to pay for your wedding. We took out a second mortgage on our home to keep your lifestyle afloat. We broke the law tonight for you. And you were going to drop us in a state ward the minute our checking accounts hit zero? She reached out and grabbed the lapels of his tailored suit. She did not shake him. She just held onto the fabric as if trying to anchor herself to a reality that no longer existed. You looked me in the eye this morning and told me you were building an empire for this family. My mother gasped, the first fresh tears finally spilling over her lashes. You said you were going to take care of us. I am Mom. I swear I am. Bradley pleaded, his eyes darting frantically toward the federal detectives, desperately hoping someone would intervene. I just need this bridge loan to clear. Once the investors see the capital, we are going to be rich. We are going to have a massive estate. You can live in the guest house just like we planned. My mother slowly let go of his suit. She took a step back, shaking her head. There is no loan, Bradley. Your father is in handcuffs. You stole from your sister. The bank is going to take our house, and you are going to leave us on the street. She turned her head away from him, unable to bear the sight of the monster she had actively created. Across the room, my father leaned heavily against the mahogany wall. The steel handcuffs clicked softly behind his back as he shifted his weight. He looked at his wife standing in her ruined dress, and then he looked at his son cowering in the chair. Richard was a man who had built his entire identity around being the powerful, untouchable patriarch. He had manipulated the family trust, ruined my college fund, and committed federal bank fraud because he could not accept the fact that his lineage was a failure. And now, facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison, he realized the ultimate devastating irony of his life. He had sacrificed everything for a parasite. My father slowly turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. For the first time in 35 years, there was no arrogance in his expression. There was no booming banking voice. There was only the crushed, pathetic realization of a man who had bet his entire life on the wrong horse. Olivia, my father whispered, his voice cracking horribly. Olivia, I am so sorry. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I looked at the man who had threatened to destroy my career and disinherit me just 30 minutes ago. You are not sorry you did it, Dad, I replied, my voice echoing clearly through the dining room. You are just sorry you got caught. Please. He begged, tears finally tracing down his deeply lined face. You have to believe me. If I had known he was planning to abandon us, if I had known he viewed us like that, I never would have signed the wire transfer. I thought I was protecting the family name. I thought I was doing what a father is supposed to do. What a father is supposed to do, I asked, taking a slow step toward him. A father is supposed to protect all of his children. But you did not want a daughter. You wanted a prop. You wanted an audience to applaud your golden boy. You spent my entire life telling me I was selfish, telling me I was greedy, telling me I was never doing enough for this family. I gestured toward Bradley, who was currently weeping openly into his hands. You stole my college education to buy him a house he lost. You forced me into massive debt while you subsidized his fake entrepreneur lifestyle. And tonight you tried to steal the one gift Grandma ever gave me just to cover up your own financial crimes. I looked back at my father, making sure he saw the absolute lack of forgiveness in my eyes. You destroyed your relationship with the one person who actually had the means and the loyalty to take care of you in your old age. You traded a daughter who built her own empire for a son who planned to dump you in a Medicare ward the second the money ran dry. You made your choice, Dad. Now you get to live with it. My father closed his eyes, dropping his chin to his chest. A ragged, broken sob tore out of his throat. He had nothing left to say. There was no defense to mount, no manipulation tactic left to deploy. He was entirely spiritually and financially bankrupt. Detective Gallagher cleared his throat, stepping into the center of the room to reclaim control of the scene. He looked at my grandmother and pointed to the silver tablet resting on the table. Ma'am, we are going to need to confiscate that device as physical evidence. The audio recording contains explicit admissions of premeditated fraud and intent to exploit a senior citizen. Grandma Beatrice calmly slid the iPad across the white tablecloth toward the detective. Take whatever you need, detective, she said smoothly. I have the files backed up on 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. I will ensure my corporate attorneys forward you the complete, unedited transcripts first thing tomorrow morning. The taller detective picked up the tablet, slipping it into a clear plastic evidence bag. He then turned his attention to Jasmine, who was still pressing herself flat against the far wall, as if trying to merge with the wallpaper. Ma'am, the detective said, his voice flat and professional. Based on your own statements to the patrol officers and the audio recording, we just heard you had prior knowledge that the vehicle was stolen, and you actively participated in the conspiracy to use it as fraudulent collateral. I need you to step forward and place your hands behind your back. No, absolutely not, Jasmine shrieked, pressing her hands flat against the expensive wallpaper as if she were trying to physically push herself through the mahogany wall. She shook her head so violently her elaborate braids whipped through the air. You are not putting those on me. I am a victim here. Do you hear me? I am a victim of financial abuse. Detective Gallagher did not slow his approach. He pulled his own set of steel handcuffs from his belt, the metallic clicking sound cutting through her hysterical protests. Ma'am, he said, his tone dropping into a hardened, authoritative warning. I am giving you one lawful order to present your hands. If you make me reach for you, I will add resisting arrest to your list of federal charges. Do not make this harder than it already is. Jasmine realized the detective was entirely immune to her theatrics. The tears, the expensive silk gown, the country club setting, none of it mattered to a federal agent holding a recorded confession. The absolute reality of a prison cell suddenly materialized right in front of her. Driven by pure, unfiltered self-preservation, she immediately sought the only available sacrifice to save her own skin. She lunged away from the wall, but not toward the door. She lunged toward Bradley. You did this to me, Jasmine screamed, her voice tearing through the room like a jagged knife. She pointed both of her shaking fingers directly at her husband's face. You lied to me from the very beginning. You told me you were a successful entrepreneur. You told me the bank approved your funding based on your own merit. You never told me you were completely blacklisted. You never told me you had to forge documents and steal your own sister's car just to keep the lights on. Bradley cowered in his chair, raising his arms to shield his face as if he expected her to physically strike him. Jasmine, please stop, he begged, his voice a pathetic, watery whine. We can hire a defense attorney. We can figure this out. We are a team. We are a team, Jasmine repeated, her eyes widening in sheer psychotic disbelief. A team? You used my name on the loan documents, Bradley. You used my signature to secure the secondary collateral. You tied me to a federal crime without my knowledge, and now you want to play the team card. I am not going to prison for your pathetic fake business. I am not ruining my life because you are too incompetent to hold down a real job. She reached for her left hand. With frantic, violent, uncoordinated movements, she grabbed the massive diamond engagement ring and the matching diamond wedding band sitting on her finger. The rings had cost an absolute fortune, a fortune I now knew Bradley had financed on high-interest credit cards he could never pay off. She yanked them over her knuckle with such force I thought she might dislocate her own finger. She pulled her arm back and hurled the rings directly at his chest. The heavy platinum and diamond bands struck Bradley right in the collarbone. They bounced off his tailored suit jacket and clattered loudly onto the polished hardwood floor, landing right in the middle of the spilled red wine and shattered crystal glass. I am done with you, Jasmine declared, her chest heaving as she stood over him. I am filing for divorce the absolute second I am allowed to make a phone call. I am calling the best vicious divorce attorney in this city, and I am handing them everything. I will testify against you. I will testify against your father. I will give the federal prosecutors every single password to your fake corporate accounts. I will do whatever it takes to ensure you spend the next 20 years in a concrete cell. She turned away from the trembling, broken shell of her husband and looked directly at Detective Gallagher. Her face was flushed, her breathing rapid, but she forced her chin up, trying to negotiate her way out of handcuffs. I am fully cooperating, Officer, Jasmine stated, her voice shaking but determined. I will be a star witness for the state. But I am not going to jail tonight. I am going back to my house. I am packing up his belongings, and I am throwing them onto the front lawn. I am taking the house, the furniture, and every single cent of equity we have in that property to compensate for the extreme emotional distress and financial fraud he has subjected me to. She crossed her arms over her chest, genuinely believing her impromptu declaration of divorce somehow shielded her from criminal liability. She thought she could just wash her hands of the man she had happily enabled for years, take the luxurious suburban house they shared, and walk away clean. She thought she was the smartest person in the room, executing a brilliant tactical retreat, while the rest of the family burned. I had stood silently by the table watching her spectacular meltdown. I watched her throw her husband to the wolves without a second thought. I watched her try to bargain with federal agents using evidence she did not even control. But when she mentioned taking the house, I realized it was finally time to drop the absolute final curtain on her delusion. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, taking a slow, calm sip. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. The sound was quiet, but in that tense room it drew everyone's attention. I set the glass back down on the coaster and looked directly at my sister-in-law. "Take what house, Jasmine?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but it cut through her frantic energy like a scalpel. Jasmine froze. She slowly turned her head to look at me, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "My house." "Olivia." Jasmine snapped, her tone dripping with venom and condescension. "The 4-bedroom house in the gated community that your brother and I live in. The house whose mortgage has my name on it. The house I am taking in the divorce settlement, because a judge will absolutely grant me full ownership after I prove my husband is a convicted felon. That house." I let out a soft, humorless chuckle. I shook my head, genuinely marveling at her inability to understand the basic mechanics of the financial disaster she was currently standing in. "You really did not understand a single word of the evidence we just discussed, did you?" I asked, leaning against the edge of the mahogany table. I gestured toward the forged title transfer and the printed wire receipts still sitting on the tablecloth. "I just proved to these federal detectives that Bradley secured a $300,000 commercial bridge loan using a stolen Porsche as the primary collateral." I know that Jasmine yelled, her patience entirely evaporating. "That is why I am divorcing him. He committed fraud." "But the Porsche was only the primary collateral." I continued, my voice remaining perfectly level and instructional. "A $300,000 loan requires a much larger safety net, especially for a borrower with a history of commercial forgery. The lender required secondary collateral to underwrite the risk. And as you just admitted a few moments ago, you and Bradley put your primary residence up as that secondary collateral." Jasmine swallowed hard, her confidence visibly faltering. "Yes," she said defensively. "We put a lien on the house to secure the bridge loan, but the loan was approved, the money was wired, the house is perfectly safe." I smiled. It was the coldest, most ruthless smile I had ever worn in my entire life. "The house was safe as long as the primary collateral remained valid, Jasmine. But the primary collateral is a stolen vehicle. The second I reported this Porsche stolen, and the second these officers arrived to impound it, the primary collateral was legally voided." I watched the realization hit her. I watched her eyes widen as the basic mathematics of the situation finally clicked into place in her mind. When the primary collateral on a high-risk commercial bridge loan is seized by law enforcement due to fraud, I explained, driving the final nail into the coffin of her luxurious lifestyle, the loan is not just flagged. It is instantly automatically defaulted. The lender immediately calls in the entire debt. And because you cannot pay back $300,000 in cash tonight, the lender will immediately seize the secondary collateral. I paused, letting the silence stretch out for a maximum agonizing effect. "They are going to foreclose on your home, Jasmine. The bank is going to take the property. You cannot take the house in a divorce settlement because you no longer own it. You are completely and utterly bankrupt." Jasmine stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. The aggressive, self-righteous survivor, who had just thrown her wedding rings on the floor, had vanished. She was left standing there in a ruined silk dress, realizing she had absolutely nothing left to her name. No husband, no house, no money, and no escape. But that was not even the worst part of her nightmare. because she did not yet know exactly who owned the bank that was about to take everything she had. I reached down into my leather bag one final time. The room was so entirely devoid of sound that the simple rustle of my hand brushing against the interior lining echoed like a gunshot. My fingers wrapped around a thick, heavy black folder. I pulled it out and placed it squarely on the white tablecloth right next to the shattered crystal and the spilled wine. "You see, Jasmine?" I began, keeping my voice conversational and light, as if I were explaining a simple mathematical equation to a child. "My father only wired that $300,000 yesterday afternoon. He did that because Bradley was desperately trying to pay off the massive, predatory private bridge loan he took out 8 months ago. The original loan he used to lease that fancy downtown office space and buy his expensive wardrobe. The loan that you co-signed." Jasmine stared at the black folder, her chest rising and falling in rapid, terrified breaths. She did not say a word. She was completely paralyzed by the impending reality of whatever was inside that cover. "That original private lender is notorious for issuing high-interest, high-risk capital to desperate people," I explained, tapping the cover of the folder with my index finger. "And they are equally notorious for selling off that debt to collection agencies the absolute second a borrower misses 3 consecutive payments. Bradley missed his 4th payment last week. The debt was officially classified as distressed and toxic. The lender listed it on the private corporate market for pennies on the dollar, desperate to recoup whatever capital they could before your inevitable bankruptcy." I looked down to the other end of the table. Grandma Beatrice was watching me with a look of profound, glittering pride. She offered me a single approving nod. "Grandma Beatrice and I had a lovely cup of tea last Tuesday afternoon." I continued, turning my attention back to the trembling woman pressed against the wall. "We discussed the forensic audit of the family trust. We discussed my father's impending criminal charges. And we discussed the absolute certainty that you and Bradley were about to lose everything. So we decided to make a joint real estate investment." I flipped the black folder open. Inside was a stack of legally binding notarized financial contracts. With Grandma Beatrice providing the capital backing, I formed an anonymous limited liability company, I said, sliding the top document across the table toward Jasmine. "And 2 days ago, my company purchased your defaulted bridge loan directly from the private lender. We bought the entire portfolio." Jasmine let out a choked, breathless sound. She looked down at the document, her eyes scanning the bold legal print. "Do you understand what that means, Jasmine?" I asked, my voice dropping into a cold, ruthless register. "I am your bank. I am the primary lien holder on your 4-bedroom suburban house. I own the debt on your business credit cards. I own the debt on the leased office space. I legally own every single financial obligation you and your husband have ever signed your names to." Jasmine slowly shook her head, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Tears of pure, unadulterated terror began to stream down her perfectly contoured face. "You cannot take the house in a divorce settlement, Jasmine, because you do not have any equity left to take," I told her, delivering the final crushing blow. "You breached the loan covenants the second you missed those payments. The primary collateral was voided tonight. So at 8 o'clock this morning, my corporate attorney filed the official foreclosure and seizure notices at the county courthouse. You do not have 30 days to vacate. You do not have an eviction grace period. The property is currently being seized. If you try to go back to that house tonight, you will find the locks changed and a security team standing in the driveway. You are left with absolutely nothing." The fight completely drained out of Jasmine. The arrogant, therapy-speaking, condescending woman who had demanded I hand over the keys to my car just an hour ago was entirely gone. Her knees literally buckled beneath her. She slid down the expensive mahogany wall and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Bradley did not even look at her. He was staring blankly at the ceiling, his mind completely broken by the sheer magnitude of the trap I had built. He had spent his entire life assuming there would always be a safety net, a parent to bail him out, a sister to steal from. He never once calculated what would happen if the safety net wrapped around his throat and pulled tight. Detective Gallagher cleared his throat, breaking the heavy dramatic spell that had settled over the dining room. He looked at the paperwork on the table, then looked at me, a silent gesture of professional respect passing between us. He turned to the two uniformed patrol officers standing by the doors. "Process him," the detective ordered, nodding toward Bradley. The two patrol officers stepped forward, their heavy boots thudding against the floor. They grabbed Bradley by his tailored sleeves and hauled him roughly to his feet. Bradley did not resist. He was entirely limp, a hollow shell of the golden child. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the room, officially ending his pathetic reign of entitlement. "You have the right to remain silent." The lead patrol officer recited, his voice completely devoid of emotion as he turned Bradley toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I watched as they marched my brother out of the private dining room. He did not look back. He did not ask for our mother. He just kept his eyes glued to the floor, shuffling out into the bright lights of the country club lobby to be paraded in front of the wealthy patrons he had tried so desperately to impress. Detective Gallagher's partner placed his hand firmly on my father's shoulder. "Let us go, Richard," the partner commanded. My father, his hands shackled behind his back, took a slow, agonizing step forward. As he passed my chair, he stopped. He looked down at me, his eyes brimming with tears, his face etched with the profound agony of a man who had orchestrated his own absolute destruction. He opened his mouth, perhaps to offer one final desperate apology, or perhaps to beg for mercy one last time. But the detective gave him a firm push, forcing him to keep walking. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them, leaving only 3 people remaining in the chaotic, ruined dining room. Me, Grandma Beatrice, and my mother. Susan was still sitting on the floor amidst the spilled wine and the shattered glass. She looked around the empty room, her mind struggling to process the fact that her husband and her son had just been hauled away in handcuffs. The luxurious, perfect family life she had sacrificed my entire childhood to maintain had been completely incinerated in less than an hour. She slowly turned her head and looked up at me. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes wide with a frantic, clinging desperation. "Olivia." My mother whispered, her voice trembling violently. She reached out a shaking hand, her fingers gripping the hem of my dress. "Olivia, what am I going to do? They froze the accounts. They took your father. I do not have anywhere to go. You have to help me. You have to let me come home with you. I am your mother. You cannot just abandon me here." I looked down at the woman gripping my dress. I remembered the countless times I had begged for her support. I remembered crying in my childhood bedroom while she took my college fund to buy Bradley a house. I remembered her telling me I was selfish, greedy, and ungrateful for simply wanting to keep the things I had earned. I reached down and calmly peeled her fingers off my clothing. I smoothed the fabric of my dress, took a step back, and picked up my designer bag. "I am not abandoning you, Mom," I said, my voice entirely devoid of anger, pity, or love. "I am simply treating you exactly the way you taught me to treat family." I reached into the front pocket of my purse and pulled out the crisp, leather-bound check presenter that the country club manager had quietly slipped onto the edge of the table before the chaos began. It was the bill for the private room reservation and the expensive champagne my parents had ordered to celebrate their successful theft. I opened the leather booklet, pulled the printed receipt out, and let it flutter down through the air. It landed gently on the hardwood floor, resting right next to my mother's trembling knees. "You always said family pays their own way, Mom," I said, looking down at her one last time. "Time to pay up." I turned my back on her sobbing, broken figure and walked over to the head of the table. I offered my arm to Grandma Beatrice. She smiled a warm, genuine expression of pride and looped her arm through mine. Together we walked out of the private dining room, leaving the door wide open behind us so the entire country club could hear the bitter weeping of a woman who had finally gotten exactly what she deserved. The valet attendant had my metallic gray Porsche Cayenne waiting right at the front curb, its engine purring smoothly in the cool night air. The police cruisers had already departed, taking the trash with them. I helped Grandma Beatrice into the passenger seat, tipped the terrified valet $100 bill, and slid behind the leather steering wheel. I shifted the car into drive and pulled smoothly out of the Oakmont Country Club, leaving the toxic wreckage of my past in the rearview mirror forever. It has been exactly 1 year since that birthday dinner. The federal prosecutors did not offer my father a plea deal. The evidence I provided was too comprehensive, too perfectly documented. Richard was convicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and bank fraud. He is currently serving a 12-year sentence in a minimum security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He lost his pension, his banking license, and his entire professional legacy. Bradley did not fare any better. The commercial loan fraud combined with the grand theft auto charge and his previous history of forgery earned him a 7-year sentence in a state facility. Jasmine made good on her promise. She filed for divorce the very next morning, testifying against him in exchange for total immunity. However, immunity from prosecution did not save her from financial ruin. I executed the foreclosure on their suburban house with absolute ruthless efficiency. The property was sold at auction, and Jasmine was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom in a cramped apartment across the state, completely cut off from the luxury she felt so entitled to. As for my mother, she was never criminally charged, but her punishment was arguably the most severe. With the bank seizing the family estate to cover the massive financial penalties my father incurred, Susan was left entirely destitute. She currently lives in a tiny subsidized studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She tries to call me from different numbers every few months, leaving tearful voicemails begging for a second chance, begging for money, begging for the daughter she threw away. I never answer. Grandma Beatrice and I took a 3-week luxury vacation to the Amalfi Coast last summer to celebrate my promotion to managing partner at my investigative firm. I am thriving, surrounded by friends who actually respect me, building a life entirely on my own terms. The silence in my life is no longer filled with anxiety and manipulation. It is filled with absolute, unbroken peace. Sometimes cutting the cord on a toxic family is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of basic survival. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and you cannot save people who are actively trying to drown you to keep themselves afloat. Have you ever had to let a toxic family member hit absolute rock bottom to protect your own peace? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you just so you could finally breathe? Tell me your stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of surviving the scapegoat life and taking back your power. Share this video with someone who might need the courage to finally stand up for themselves. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, your boundaries are not up for negotiation. Protect your peace at all costs.